Everyone mocked him as the weakest in school with zero potential, but then he awakened a god-tier template that lets him absorb endless monster powers. Now, his story starts. It was 25 days before the college entrance exam, and the classroom wall had been plastered with countdown slogans and half-baked motivational lines. Yihei mulled over whether he had actually jumped back to the final stretch before the big exam. He was back in Xia Kingdom, Ancheng No. 1 High School, 3rd year, Class 7. He wondered what kind of sick plot this was, and grumbled internally that if someone really had to reincarnate him, the least they could do was wait until after he got into college. Humanity on Blue Star had always dealt with a nightmare known as Secret Realm invasions. The Secret Realms opened gates to a separate dimension, crawling with monstrous entities, and sometimes those creatures squeezed through the cracks into human lands, where the worst of them could flatten multiple nations and put all of civilization on the edge. In response, humans built a beast gene system, injecting beast genes to awaken monster blueprints and unlock innate abilities, and only these enhanced fighters could shield mankind from destruction. That shift turned them into elites, held far above everyone else in rank and reward. The entire Blue Star tilted into an age where might ruled everything. Everything else took a back seat, and only martial progress earned real respect. The system chimed in that the transmigration tutorial had wrapped up and confirmed that the target vessel was Yihei, then pushed in a batch of memories. Yihei wondered if he really got dumped into a teenager's life. One of his classmates snorted that everyone should check out their deadweight Yihei having another breakdown, while another snickered and tossed out whether trash like that still dared to dream about college. Wang Xing barked at him, demanding why he hadn't just quit school and stayed out of the way since all he was good for was dying in mediocrity. Yihei figured every tragic loser setup needed one mean-spirited ringleader to drive the cliché. Judging by the scorn, the original body's social standing had cratered after his parents died in sophomore year, which tanked his focus and shredded his test scores, dragging down the class average like an anchor. She stepped up, flared at him, and fired off a challenge, demanding to know what he was staring at before pointing out that it was martial arts period and daring him to throw hands. He rolled through whether he had even looked at her and figured he'd just been zoned out, but either way, it wasn't like he'd been the one slacking then, and now he was the one stuck with the fallout, which made the whole deal feel pitiful. The teacher called them in, asked if they were ready, and reminded them that it was time for the genetic enhancement injection, the moment their 3 years of body training and martial drills had led to. Well, for those who actually tried. Yihei muttered that this whole thing had to be some kind of messed up joke since he'd done nothing wrong, but here he was anyway, and there was no reason to lose it now. Still, now that the role was his, he figured he might as well fix what had been left behind. Not long after, the class entered the gene injection room, and when someone near him tossed out a guess on whether he'd score a Tier 3 Mountain Splitter or a Tier 4 Sea Bridge Dragon, the other cackled that it would probably turn out to be some Tier 1 Butt Beast. The cases holding the serum cracked open, spilling cold smoke into the room. The teacher explained that this was the Gene Awakening Serum, laced with the genetic core of every known magical beast humanity had ever cataloged. Once injected, their bodies would absorb one at random and trigger an awakening. And usually better physique meant a better pull, but they shouldn't freeze up and just ride the energy wave after it hits, then stepped forward to call Chen Pengfei and Miao Yunuo. Yihei clocked how weird they all acted after their shots, so this clearly wasn't going to be a smooth ride. Whatever, he figured, and went in. A moment later, something flickered in his eyes. But the teacher squinted and commented that he didn't really look any different, so maybe they accidentally handed him a dud. Wang Xing suddenly sneered and urged the others to take a look, since Yihei didn't seem to have awakened anything at all. A warrior without an awakening resembled a bird missing wings. While she questioned whether he wasn't fully doomed, she remarked that it worked out perfectly, so he didn't need to become a warrior and could just go home to wait for death. He found her unbearable and figured she was probably leading the bullying against him. Suddenly, a sharp pain hit him, and the sensation felt oddly familiar. The system announced that he acquired the Infinite Monster template. Wang Xing demanded to know what he was pulling and mocked that if he had no awakening, he should quit the act. But she also warned them to clear out. She challenged her and pressed why they should. But he warned that if they didn't leave now, they'd be too late. He unleashed his powerful aura and launched her through the air. One student shouted about the force of the impact and questioned who awakened something. Another admitted they couldn't bear the aura. Another wondered why they started puking. Meanwhile, Lu tensed up when she sensed his aura. At the same time, Chuzhou considered whether someone stronger than him had appeared. Yihei revealed that he got the A-rank template Dimala along with an infinite monster template. He questioned whether that was the golden finger the system gave him. One student double-checked if that was the same loser Yihei from before, and another pointed out that he just used his aura to blast everyone nearby. Even Wang Xing got knocked out when she awakened a second-tier magic beast, the Flame Claw Scorpio, and the other student asked what template he awakened. Yihei apologized and admitted he caused a bit of a scene while awakening, and he told them to back off, but they wouldn't cooperate. Suddenly, the PSA announced that all third-year students who had awakened needed to proceed immediately to the testing building to examine their magical beast gene and evaluate their martial arts level. A short time later, students stepped into the gene breakthrough detection device, which could assess both beast gene and martial level. One student reported that Li Xinyuan from their class awakened a third-tier magical beast bloodline, Swiftbug, and another noted how lucky he was since he'd just been average before, but was now number 1. Strong bloodlines really did break the rules. Another commented that Chuzhou definitely lived up to his status as the top student of the grade, being not only a level 9 martial apprentice, but also someone who awakened the best tier 3 bloodline, Ice Demon Dragon, and that made him the obvious champion of Ansheng City. When one student checked what Lu, also a level 9 martial apprentice, awakened, another replied that it was a stage 4 rare bloodline, Nether Sparrow, the top provincial scorer. If that beast ever fully emerged, it could level most of a city and ordinary warriors wouldn't stand a chance. Only grandmasters could hold the line. Yihei wondered why everyone else's beast templates were labeled stage 3 or stage 4, while his showed up as A-class. Suddenly, they called him next, and he questioned whether this was overkill. One student remarked that his presence was so strong he might become someone major. Another advised building a connection and riding his success. Another admitted that he was kind of a dream guy. He figured the world really did spin around martial power. He stepped into the gene breakthrough device. One student reminded him it was his turn, and based on that aura, his level had to be high. Another questioned what kind of bloodline could carry that much pressure just from awakening and commented that it was insane. Another declared that their number 1 was having a massive breakthrough right then. Meanwhile, Chuzhou realized his name was Yihei and figured he might actually be worth keeping an eye on. A few moments later, they all saw that he was only a martial disciple stage 3, and his beast bloodline showed up as unknown. One student mocked that even his younger brother in middle school could beat a stage 3. Another scoffed about how embarrassing and underwhelming it looked. Another speculated that maybe he had no bloodline at all, and someone else agreed and questioned what decent bloodline anyone at stage 3 could even have. Another dismissed the earlier display as just a bunch of noise. Another wrapped it up by calling him the same hopeless loser. Yihei accepted it, matched what he expected. The template hadn't been detected, but it did trigger the prompt for the infinite monster template. His template rank might not match theirs, but it meant he could draw monster templates infinitely, as long as he met the requirements. He wondered whether that made him the king of monsters. At his school, Yihei approached his teacher. The teacher probed whether he planned to take a break to study at home and return for the college entrance exam, and whether he actually believed he could handle studying alone. Yihei emphasized his determination to improve, admitted he lagged too far behind, and explained that if he didn't undergo special training now, keeping up with the others wouldn't even be an option. The teacher acknowledged that if Yihei aimed to become a warrior, college was the only route, and although his bloodline had awakened, his foundation was too flimsy, so the entrance exam stood completely out of reach, and he needed to accept repeating the year instead of rushing through. But Yihei pushed harder, stressed his desperation to improve, and insisted that his bloodline wasn't ordinary, so with enough training, success wasn't impossible. And he urged the teacher to notice the sincerity in his eyes, since lying to him would never cross his mind. And the teacher took one look and admitted the sincerity was there, but he still warned he'd expect him to return next year to repeat the year anyway. The next day, Yihei went to the Ansheng Warrior Center. His parents' house had been mortgaged for $600,000, and with the accident compensation of over $1 million, he now held a decent chunk of startup capital. To boost his strength at that point, he stood between two choices: level up as a warrior or improve the contract rate with Dimala's template. He considered that according to the infinite monster template data, each template began with only one compatibility point, but Dimala had 3, so he puzzled over the source of the extra 2 points. Only one explanation fit. The Dimala template must have absorbed power from the genetic awakening serum and gained the other 2 compatibility points. That confirmed that gene-related serums in this world actually enhance template abilities. So instead of grinding away as a warrior, pouring money into increasing template compatibility worked out better, and that meant buying a gene-enhancing serum became top priority. The system verified that he carried a student ID card upon entry. He froze at the sight of the crowd inside. He became aware that everyone there had awakened their bloodline. After awakening the Mad Flame Dimala template, he gained its unique sensory trait, the Life Magnetic Field. It detected the life signals released by living beings through its own field, so he could distinctly feel the warriors' chi and blood roaring like furnaces, their bloodlines growling like beasts. He accepted that surrounded by warriors and monsters alike, he couldn't bottle up the surge of combat instinct anymore. Because Mad Dimala wasn't just another beast, it was the king of beasts in their world, bound to reign over every living thing. But the reality was, he still ranked as a rookie, so that fighting instinct had to stay sealed for now. But once his strength caught up, he'd show the world what the king of beasts really meant. He jolted when Huang He Li tapped his shoulder. She reminded him not to stare at others so openly. He explained he hadn't meant to. She shrugged it off, mentioned that if he'd just awakened his monster gene, then losing control came with the territory. When she inquired what brought him to the center, he answered that he needed to buy genetic medicine. But the building confused him, so he asked if she could show him around. She raised an eyebrow at him already using gene medicine so early, and he fired back by asking what the problem was. She admitted it wasn't necessarily wrong, she just pointed out the high cost and the risk of developing resistance, which would dull its effects with time. To make the most of it, she said, warriors usually waited until their bloodline stalled out before using it. He asked about the price of one gene potion, and she replied that at his level, only the solid-type beginner potion worked, and it ran for about 400,000. He reeled at the number. After calculating, he realized that not even draining all his savings could buy 5, so he asked if she knew someone who could score him a discount. She handed him her business card, noting that a veteran warrior's referral might knock down the price. He expressed sincere thanks, and she responded that maybe they'd cross paths again if fate allowed. He noted that now began the phase of insane spending. He went straight to the warrior hospital to purchase genetic medicine. He also dropped by the weapon shop. By evening, bright blue light lit up his apartment, and his scream rang out beyond the walls. His compatibility rose from 3% to 7%. His overall stats jumped from 8 to 15, and he stepped into armed rank 7. He claimed that this must be what leveling up felt like, and with every injection of gene potion, his physique sharpened. But by the last dose, the growth barely ticked upward, so it looked like stronger bodies struggled more with triggering base mutations. It wasn't bad at all, considering he gained in minutes what others slaved over for 3 years, and that was purely from his base physical stats. If he unleashed Dimala's bloodline power, he might genuinely compete for the top scorer spot in the exam, and if cheat mode still lost to the gifted, then the cheat wasn't worth a damn. So heading to the secret realm became the obvious move. Secret realm rifts followed a rank system from S to E, where higher ranks meant deadlier beasts, and S-class creatures couldn't be restrained by human means, so letting them loose on the real world would spell an apocalypse. When Yehe arrived at Anchung No. 3 E-level secret realm, he noticed the crowd was thinner than expected, and maybe that was because the place had been picked clean a long time ago. Being an old realm, its treasures were already looted, so all that remained were scraps and beginner-tier beasts for rookie warriors to practice on. He acknowledged the receptionist and explained he had a booking for Secret Realm No. 3, and she directed him to sign the death waiver, which served as his entry pass. After a short wait, he verified that it really was a secret realm rift. This marked the start of his climb to Beast King. He was on his way. He leapt into the rift like plunging into a lake. He touched down on the opposite side. Spotting the Kanglan Star, Anwei Star, and Taijin Star, he noted that while textbooks described the realm's layout, nothing beat the real view, and the place was breathtaking. The starry sky was fully visible. A blade-fang rabbit, classified as a first-ranked beast, crept up from behind. It sprang at him. but he seized it by the ears without struggle. He had already activated his template ability, Life Magnetic Field. As he scoffed at the rabbit for being brainless, he questioned if it genuinely assumed he couldn't detect it. He crushed its skull with one hand. He assessed that its magic core showed white coloration, marking it as average quality. So the payout was around 1,000 yuan, which wasn't bad since he made that in mere minutes, while most people slogged for a whole month to hit 3 or 4,000. But amassing first-rank beast cores wasn't worth much in the long run, so grabbing at least the second-rank beast made more sense. A demon corpse bug, classified as second rank, burst up from beneath the ground. He commented that he really spoke it into existence. Yihe clashed with the demon corpse bug inside the secret realm. He struck with his sword. He mentioned browsing the monster encyclopedia, and compared to the steel-hard carapace on its back, the soft armor on its belly looked way easier to punch through. The monster rolled in and charged straight at him. He retaliated with martial arts. He unleashed his skill, Hyper Beam. Out of nowhere, the monster launched a volley at him. He flinched at the fact that its mandibles could shoot projectiles. He evaded cleanly. He griped about whether the bug realized how pricey his outfit was. He concluded that with his current martial artist level, he couldn't do anything substantial to the bug, and without solid martial techniques to back him, even with high Dantian energy and solid blood vitality, he could barely bring out half of his strength, and that was mostly because the original body had completely flunked its studies. He got cornered into cheating, and he activated Mad Demola's Emperor Demon's bloodline. His arms mutated, and his empowerment surged to 21. The monster shrieked in his direction. He launched himself at its jaws. He tore through the head and clawed all the way to the tail. With his physique now ramped up to 21 points, he flattened the Tier 2 demon bug, and even after canceling his transformation, he still had to vent the residual heat in his body, leaving him overheating like a jet engine. The short sword he'd just bought ended up corroded by venom. When he grumbled about how a $250,000 weapon couldn't even take on a Tier 2 monster, he ranted that the whole thing was a scam. The quality check was garbage, and it deserved a 0-star review. He asked if monster hunting always burned this much energy because now he was starving and he hadn't packed a single snack. He caught a whiff of something strangely fragrant. He figured out that it was the magic core. The corpse demon bug's core turned out to be green grade, and it even gave off a weirdly delicious scent. He muttered that nobody cared. He gulped it down. The magic core reacted inside his system. His compatibility ticked up from 7% and he blinked. He tallied that after spending hundreds of thousands on one genetic potion just to raise compatibility by 1%. So 3 or 4 of them basically matched a full potion. The white magic core from the Blade Tooth Rabbit should at least raise it by 1%. He regretted blowing his cash on pay to win, but he swore he'd channel that regret into motivation, and that night he'd hunt till he dropped. He triggered his Life Magnetic Field. By the next afternoon, his compatibility jumped to 9%, and his overall physique reached 15.8. He realized that once he hit 9%, white magic cores stopped affecting compatibility, so he'd have to offload them for cash. He reported collecting 20 white magic cores and 1 green one, and the receptionist nearly short-circuited over whether a regular high school student could actually rack up that many. He recalled that based on government rules, martial artists had to turn in 1/10 of their loot. So for 1 green core, he owed 5 white ones, and he tallied that he had 200,000 Xia Kingdom credits in his account. 9 days before the college entrance exam, Yihei headed into Ansheng No. 4 D-Class Secret Realm. Old Lu wondered if they could pull off the Blood Jade Flower bounty mission at that point, and Lin Hei brought up how they'd already tracked its general location during their last run. But Old Chen had gotten hurt by a monster and couldn't join this time. Zhao Xia raised the issue that it left them with only 5 people, which Xiao Wu confirmed, pointing out that entering a D-Class Secret Realm required at least 6. Lin Hei waved it off, mentioning he'd reached out to an agency for help and lined up a new martial artist. He double-checked whether it was the martial disciple level 9 guy called Dadzle, and Yihe nodded, explaining the guy was still a student, technically barred from D-Class zones, so he went through a shady agency, shelled out 100,000 credits for a fake identity, and got scammed hard. Lin He found the name Dadzle kind of weird, and the guy brushed it off, claiming using his original name would have triggered copyright. Lin He shrugged, treating it as just a code name, and noted that with level 9 strength, The guy wasn't really cut out for a D class anyway, so they'd let him tag along to learn but not drag them down, and the guy had no objections. He figured setting expectations early was solid and way better than getting screwed halfway through. Lin He gave the signal to move, adding that they had to grab the blood jade flower this time. A short while later, Lin He checked the tracker and noted the blood jade flower was sitting in an oasis up ahead guarded by a Tier 2 monster, carrying a general-level bloodline. Yihei commented that it had been a rainforest before and now it looked like a desert, which suggested the secret realms weren't tied to a single world. Out of nowhere, a teammate flagged Lin He and announced that Earth Demon Rats had locked onto them. Lin He assigned Hood to handle it, and Hood gave the go-ahead. He flung his daggers in one smooth motion. Each hit found a skull. The daggers detonated. He reported the wipeout, and Yehhe figured the guy had infused martial energy into the darts, so they exploded like bombs, which made him ruthless and low-key. A little later, the oasis came into view. They started hiking toward it. Yehhe brought up the obvious and wondered why they weren't using a vehicle, since the oasis was still a ways off, and Lin He clarified that the monsters there were insanely sound-sensitive, so the noise from an off-road engine would blow their cover. Plus, he wanted to assign tasks while they walked. Zhao Xia was on grenade duty to bait the beast. Xiao Wu and Hood had to rig traps. Old Lu would lay down suppressive fire. Lin He would take the front. Yihei just had to observe, and he was cool with that. Shortly after, Zhao Xia launched the stun grenade. It carried high-level monster pheromones, triggering territorial rage in nearby beasts. A Tier 2 Earth Dragon stormed out, and they gave Yihei a heads-up to keep clear. Meanwhile, Hood's daggers were scattered across the field. Huo Peng picked one up. He chuckled while dragging his tongue across the blade. Lin He took the Earth Dragon's head clean off. Zhao Xia hollered at Lin He while Xiao Wu noted the thing had gone limp. Lin He ordered them to push forward. Out of nowhere, they warned him to stay sharp. Yihei sprang off the ground in a blink. He launched himself skyward and twisted mid-leap. He unleashed his charge beam right at the monster. He noticed that even as a martial novice, he packed enough force to stagger a Tier 2 beast, and Zhao Xia recognized that punch wasn't weak at all. His mountain-crushing heavy fist flattened the target. As Xiao Wu shouted that he just dropped a Tier 2 magical beast, he brushed it off, but Lin He gave props for the save and announced that from then on, they were teammates. The team confirmed the Earth Dragon was done for. Xiao Wu mentioned they'd snagged its soul essence too, so the haul wasn't bad. Zhao Xia wondered if that glowing red thing was really valuable, and he confirmed that, of course, it could level up the template, though Yihei thought it looked more like some massive fruit. Lin, he admitted they almost blew it back there, but he figured they'd won out, and even snagged the blood jade flower. But Hood scoffed and waved the thought away, saying there was no point dwelling on it. Zhao Xia and Xiao Wu started worrying about Lin He, while old Lu checked what the deal was. Lin He pressed him on what he was trying to pull. Huo Peng snapped back that it was obvious, pointing out he was clearly out to cash in. The team recognized who they were dealing with. Yihei wondered if they'd met that bald guy before, and he explained the guy looted dungeon explorers and had locked onto them already. Lin He exposed Hood's poison blades and branded him a traitor. He challenged how he even found this place and brought up how even his own teammate only got the blood jade flower's location after entering. Yihei revealed it was the dart. The info was hidden right on it. Hood gave a mocking nod and joked he should have gone back to class with the college entrance exams coming up, but instead, here he was flirting with death. Yihei confirmed the exam was close, and he already had a top scorer badge with his name on it. Hood threw shade for being full of himself. Yihei snapped back that the real arrogance came from some greasy bald creep yapping in front of him. It was too much noise, so he decided to take out the trash. Huo Peng grinned at the entertainment, then turned to Hood and asked for his head. Hood didn't hesitate. Yehhe let out a roar and shattered every dagger flying his way. The team warned him to stay alert because Hood had vanished. He had slipped above, readying his martial technique, Mountain Splitter. Yehhe marked it as the perfect moment to debut his new skill. He blasted his high-powered beam right at Hood. He noted the guy got one-shotted clean and wondered if he was even a novice. Yehhe blew steam off his finger while Hood's body crumpled below. Huo Peng approved of the move and got curious about which big-name clan he came from. He told him straight he was from the Daemonra clan and asked if he planned to beg next. Huo Peng brushed him off as just a punk because not even gene techniques could patch the huge martial gap. He fired up his bloodline, Tyrant Terror Black Bear. He brought down his martial technique, Peak Shaker. Yehe decided to target his legs first, and Huo Peng whined about them at full volume. He hurled a punch toward him, and Yehe launched into the air. Huo Peng followed him upward without hesitation. Yehe conceded that second-tier martial artists really weren't a joke, since his atomic breath couldn't even singe an ankle bone. Huo Peng slammed his palms together and unleashed a deafening shockwave. Yehe challenged whether he was finished and insisted it was already his move. He triggered his technique, Core Fused, Mountain Crushing Fist. He hammered him with a relentless barrage. Huo Peng hit the ground, covered in bruises once the assault ended. The team praised how insanely powerful he was. Huo Peng revealed he actually carried a gene technique that released toxic gas, which was shameful, and a martial artist that Twisted definitely deserved retribution, as he would hex him without hesitation. Yehe noted the stack of curses against him just kept growing, and wondered who he was even supposed to be at this point. At the Central Sports Stadium of An City, the host welcomed the students to the annual General Higher Martial Arts School enrollment, offering them luck in martial arts. The college entrance examination followed a match-based format where candidates faced off in pairs, with the victor progressing to the next round. The exam stretched across 3 days, with the first 2 set as auditions, and students who passed would take the final exam on the 3rd day. Each student participated in 3 matches during the audition phase, and those who advanced continued until the top scorer for the year's entrance examination emerged. What the prospects bore on their shoulders was humanity's future, so they needed to unleash their real strength during the examination, both for personal goals and for all mankind. With that, the An City Higher Examinations officially opened. In Arena Number 1, the clash played out fiercely. The fight in Arena Number 4 followed routine. Meanwhile, in Arena Number 6, the audition hit a snag, as one candidate hadn't shown up. Upon inspection, the match featured Huang Tongtong and Yehe from An City Number 1 Middle School, yet only Huang Tongtong stood inside the ring. According to the rules, if Yehe failed to appear by the start of the bout, he would be marked as forfeiting. Huang Tongtong remarked that getting humiliated during the genetic conference remained her biggest disgrace and believed she could use her fire lizard to get payback this time. Instead, that coward went into hiding, avoiding the match altogether, which ruined her plans. One spectator scoffed, mocking him for dodging the entrance exam altogether, while another guessed he was curled up at home, trembling in bed, and another tossed out that someone like that had no business attending high school and should just sweep streets instead. As the referee announced Yehe's withdrawal, he got cut off. A teacher pointed out that something approached, and another picked up on a colossal aura. He tried to figure out whether it was even human. He questioned what kind of strength enabled someone to fly overhead. Yehe dropped into the arena in spectacular fashion. Huang Tongtong demanded an explanation, her vision filled with a flying shoe. He kicked her in the face and launched her backward. Yehe mentioned it had been a close call, and he almost needed to repeat the year. Huang Tongtong collapsed, so the referee ruled him the winner, though he wasn't sure if it counted. One viewer gushed that Yehe seemed absurdly strong, beating someone with a single kick, while another praised his flashy entrance, and another guessed it must have been that legendary descending kick from the sky. Yehe's current physical rating stood at 226 with a 20% compatibility. Captain Linny had rewarded him with a blood jade fruit, though it needed time to enhance his body. Now, he could unwind and see what happened next. The match between An City Number 4 Middle School Long Tao and An City Number 1 Middle School Yehe ended in his victory. Then again, the match between An City Number 3 Middle School Long Tao and An City Number 1 Middle School Yehe also went to him. One spectator shouted that Yehe was unbelievably strong, while another pointed out that he finished every match with one kick and never dragged them on. So someone coined him a one-kick Superman. Yehe, from An City Number 1 Middle School, cleared all 3 matches and moved on to round 3. Afterward, he left the arena. A recruiter encouraged him to come learn more about Dongshan University and invited him to add on WuChat. But a man claimed that although their university was private, it offered generous grants and scholarships, while another insisted they needed a strong warrior like him, and another brought up whether he had a favorite university. Yehe mulled over his favorite university. He apologized, admitting that he aimed to enter Huadu University. As they walked away, someone muttered that he was acting arrogant after reaching the finals, but would beg them for help after losing, while another reminded him to get in touch if he failed. Yihei wrestled with whether they simply didn't believe in him, but that was understandable. Huadu University ranked as the best martial arts university in Xia country and stood among the top 5 universities in the world. It remained a sacred landmark for all martial artists. In a second-tier city like An City, only a rare few ever qualified to enter that landmark, but so what? Warriors proved everything with strength, so he would catch their expressions after taking first place. Suddenly, an official stepped forward and requested his cooperation, announcing that they would re-evaluate his martial arts level. Later, the official uncovered that his martial arts level had reached 9th, and remembered that he had only been at 3rd half a month ago. After some digging, they learned that he frequently visited the E-level secret realm after school, and pressed him about why he risked such a dangerous place before the college entrance examination. Yihei considered it ridiculous to gain strength that quickly in 3 months, and pushed back on whether they were accusing him of cheating. Yihei clarified that it had been to find himself. Before his father passed away, he left a message explaining that if he wished to surpass humanity, he must not remain human. So he kept returning to the secret realm for battle, and during one of them, he broke through his genetic lock. The officials froze in disbelief. Breaking through the genetic lock remained impossible, so they had to file a report immediately, and Yihei understood that somehow he had become a key observation target. Later, a father offered his blessings to his son while a mother urged her darling to do his best, and another pledged to throw a banquet once old Wang passed the double first-class exam. Yihei watched the live streams airing street interviews with the parents and friends of examinees, but no one appeared for him, and he quietly accepted that as an orphan, no one cared. Meanwhile, the teacher encouraged Yihei to keep going and reassured that he had what it took. The first match of the promotion round began, pitting An City No. 1 Middle School's Yihei against An City No. 3 Middle School's Luo Xuan. An audience member recalled that Luo Xuan had taken first place at No. 3 Middle School and reached martial arts level 8. He had awakened with a rare second-level magical beast bloodline, and with both parents being warriors, his opponent stood no chance. Yihei offered him the first move. Luo Xuan laughed and tossed out whether he even knew who he was, and Yihei countered that whether he knew or not, the result wouldn't change. Luo Xuan confirmed that the result wouldn't change, declared victory, and activated Bloodline Awakening. He pinned his hopes on good luck, but if it failed, he would die here and release the martial dashing lightning claw. But Yihei barely blinked. He admitted the momentum held promise but still came nowhere near the collision force of the bald old man. Luo Xuan screamed in pain. Yihei raised his hand. His chop crushed Luo Xuan, tearing apart the arena. As the referee announced his win, he looked around and questioned if there really weren't any decent examinees. Another instant knockout hit the stage, and this time the one who dropped was Luo Xuan, the seated contestant, while someone blurted that he looked fierce but folded the second he touched the floor. A spectator mentioned Yihei carried himself with the calm of drifting clouds and the steadiness of a light breeze, classic master energy, and someone else pointed out his level towered way above the other examinees, so there was just no competing, while another chimed in that he looked way too cool and wished he'd make her pregnant. Even though he used his hands this time, the crowd still called it a one-hit knockout. His strength matched his title as one kick man. Everyone favored Yihei and claimed he was a lock for the finals. Meanwhile, Chu Zhou focused on Yihei. True to the one he marked, that was the guy he'd crush in the finals. Over in Huadu University's admissions broadcast room, a teacher gave the order to gather every bit of info on Yihei within 30 minutes, and they accepted without complaint. Elsewhere, the second group's advancement matches raged on. A showdown between genius-level beauties was underway, and Liu Yiliu locked in to watch. Kai Xiaoling, known as Ansheng's second senior high's queen, expressed that she couldn't deal with her android expression anymore. Liu Qingzhu, the so-called unattainable flower from Ansheng First Senior High, stayed quiet, and one viewer commented there was nothing better than watching beauties go head-to-head, while another warned not to get carried away. The match kicked off. Kai Xiaoling gave the green light and pushed to see how long the act would last once she got pinned. Liu Qingzhu activated the Liu family's secret martial art, the Sutra of Transient Splendor. Kai Xiaoling's strike failed to land. She pressed in with another kick. She declared it was time to go full throttle and fired off the Howling Gale Step. She spotted an opening, but she noticed too late that it was a trap. Her hand got caught in her own wind currents and refused to budge. Suddenly, Liu Qingzhu launched the Zhuanhuang martial technique, Primordial Chaos Finger. The host noted that a college entrance candidate actually wielded a Zhuanhuang-level move. With that kind of martial prowess, she didn't even need exam results to get into Huadu University. But Kai Xiaoling triggered the Shadow Claw Tiger King's bloodline awakening. The host pointed out that she'd awakened a third-tier royal bloodline, the Shadow Claw Tiger King. Royal bloodlines were already hard enough to handle, and that one was infamous for being brutal, so her potential had no ceiling. Kai Xiaoling demanded to see her Nether Phoenix bloodline. Liu Qingzhu replied that she'd seen enough. Kai Xiaoling challenged whether she really believed anyone under martial artist tier could go toe-to-toe with her. Liu Qingzhu unleashed another Liu family secret technique. She activated the Transient Splendor Phantom to slip free. Kai Xiaoling struck with the Fierce Tiger's crippling kick. Liu Qingzhu answered with the Primordial Chaos, Jade Finger. Their techniques collided. The host remarked that their martial forces slammed together with wild force and kicked up a dust storm across the arena. He looked on, waiting to see who'd be left standing. The dust cleared, and he spotted Kai Xiaoling still upright in the ring. But her eyes rolled back. He registered that Kai Xiaoling collapsed from exhaustion, while Liu Qingzhu remained upright in the arena. Using only martial techniques, she completely dismantled Kai Xiaoling, who also reached the 9th stage of martial arts and had awakened a royal bloodline, making her undeniably worthy of the once-in-a-century genius title. Liu Qingzhu claimed victory. Someone declared Liu Qingzhu was too powerful and absolutely legendary. Another forecasted her as Ancheng City's top scorer and challenged anyone to disagree. Another raised the question of what bloodline she awakened and disclosed it as a 4th-tier Nether Phoenix. Another reacted to the bloodline reveal and wondered what kind of monster she was, pointing out most genuine martial artists would not even compete on her level. The draw ceremony for the top 8 advancement tournament commenced. Next in line for the draw was Yihe from Ancheng First Senior High. He pulled Group A. Shen Guan of Qingfeng Private High introduced himself and mentioned he was also in Group A and figured they would end up facing each other, so Yihe introduced himself in response. Shen Guan remarked they were scheduled second and would observe the first match beforehand. Match 1 of the top 8 advancement tournament featured Luo Shi from Qingfeng Private High against Chu Zhou from Ancheng First Senior High. Luo Shi carried solid strength, having repeated a grade on purpose, specifically grinding that year to make it into Huadu University. His control over his bloodline awakening was refined, but against Chu Zhou, he did not even get a foothold. Yihe brought up Chu Zhou, and Shen Guan responded that he belonged to their school too, and wondered if he seriously did not know. Nearby, Qingfeng Private High's principal aired frustration about the immediate loss. Yihe questioned how Luo Shi stacked up to him. Shen Guan clarified that he served as the martial arts club president for Qingfeng Private High's senior year division. In terms of raw power, even his 2 teammates combined would not manage to beat him. To be honest, heading into the year's exams, he regarded Yihe as the only one worth keeping an eye on. Since childhood, his perception had been unusually acute, so he could sense that Yihe resembled a dormant volcano with something primal locked inside. He remarked that it was their turn now. Shortly after, Match 2 of the top 8 advancement tournament kicked off. It featured Shen Guan from Qingfeng Private High against Yihe from Ancheng First Senior High. The battle to decide the top 4 in An City's college entrance exam had reached a fever pitch. Yihe squared off against Shen Guan, neither side yielding an inch. Their exchange of blows nearly seared the audience's retinas. Shen Guan wiped away a nosebleed and wondered if Yihe's bloodline caused it. He observed that Yihe's ability directly targeting cells was bizarre, while Yihe noticed Shen Guan had wrapped his body in martial energy to fend off nuclear radiation. Shen Guan recognized Yihe's technique as incredible and grudgingly labeled him a monster worth fearing. He brought up the legacy of the Shen family, announcing the Shape Will Fist. Deer Peak burst forth without warning. Yihe called out its sheer speed. The host pointed out that Yihe, once dubbed One Kick Superman, had been struck for the first time. Shen Guan's Shape Will Fist clearly packed serious power. Yihe lost ground. Shen Guan called him out and hammered down Bear Crash. Yihe braced himself completely. Bear Crash didn't stop at blunt force. Shen Guan had pumped martial energy into his body, amplifying the impact. His earlier opponents had all been helpless amateurs. Shen Guan twisted low like a serpent. He conceded a partial truth. He could not only infuse his body with martial energy, but also suppress his opponent's energy, cutting them off from martial arts altogether. He hurled out Ape Hurl. A savage glint filled him. He sprang with Tiger Pounce. His eyes gleamed, and he snapped into Agile Dive. Shen Guan laid it bare. Yihe had no chance to win. The arena cracked open. Shen Guan broke into a booming laugh, thrilled as the host described how Yihe couldn't find a single opening to retaliate. Medics stood ready at the edge of the arena, knowing the Shape Wheel Fist barrage would have finished any average fighter. Victory seemed final, but the announcement stalled. Shen Guan turned. Aura flooded the space. Yihe shifted form and acknowledged Shen Guan's raw strength. He released Savage Trace, the Daimora Awakening bloodline. He remarked that if there was any comfort, Shen Guan was the first to see him like this. As Shen Guan's spirit crumbled, the host explained that manifesting a magical beast form could earn a student entrance to Huadu University without testing. In this small pocket of Anqing, there wasn't just Lu Qingzhu, the martial prodigy, but also a bloodline powerhouse. Shen Guan realized the terrifying level of Yihe's awakened bloodline. The host mentioned that each examiner had monitoring headsets to track candidates and surrounding conditions. He froze as the radiation reading spiked to 9,999,999 and muttered confusion, stunned by the nuclear overload. After watching Yihe manifest a magical beast, the examiners apparently clocked an issue and coded the arena in martial energy to contain any nuclear spillover. One audience member wondered if this counted as Yihe's bloodline awakening, while another found it sick and asked if anyone recognized the magical beast's lineage. A student from No. 1 Middle School shared they'd heard Yihe awaken some unknown bloodline, which raised the question of how something that strong could still be a mystery. Yihe figured it made sense, since Daimora didn't exist on Blue Star, and nobody would have had a clue. At the same time, Shen Guan's nose started bleeding again, and he owned up to the fact that his martial arts shield couldn't take Yihe's energy anymore, realizing he didn't have the stamina to stall much longer. He unleashed his own bloodline awakening, Golden Star Ape Demon, and the host followed up by announcing another Third Order King bloodline. This year's college entrance exam really packed a roster. Shen Guan countered with Form Will Fist Snake Strike. Yihe fired back with a martial art of his own. He launched the Mountain Arresting Fist. Shen Guan howled in pain, muttering that if he hadn't discharged the force in time, his whole arm would have snapped. He admitted he'd been overhyping himself earlier, but now the humiliation was real. Yihe acknowledged the skill, but it didn't matter. Outcome locked. In the second match of this year's college entrance examination bracket, from top 8 to top 4, a Third Order King bloodline showed up while the opposing side revealed an unknown magical beast bloodline, rare enough to stir the crowd. Shen Guan figured that after Yihe's bloodline awakened, his strength became impossible to grasp, and martial energy surged beyond his control, forcing him to pull back before charging forward again. Yihe urged him not to lose focus. He threw out a storm of punches. Shen Guan launched Form Will Fist. He countered using Snake Strike. He failed to shift Yihe, which he had expected, but aimed instead to move behind him. He leapt high. His foot transformed into an elephant's. He slammed it down onto Yihe, then he pulled back fast. His eyes stretched wide in disbelief. Yihe stayed perfectly fine. He announced it was his move now. He charged with sharp intent. Shen Guan dropped to his knees. He declared defeat. Yihe blurted out that he'd just been getting pumped, only to get left hanging, leaving him totally out of sorts. He sighed and waved it off. Bottled up energy made him miserable. Once more, as per the rules, once one side surrendered, the other had no grounds to retaliate. The host confirmed the match had ended. Representing An City's No. 1 Middle School, Yihe stood victorious, and the crowd burst out that he was incredible. Shen Guan got memed because before the fight he guaranteed victory. But after losing, he apologized for not letting Yi unleash his full strength. One streamer dropped a WeChat invite for Yihe's fan group 4, noting the first 3 were maxed out, while another uploaded Yihe's full college entrance exam match, and someone else claimed Yihe had taken the top scorer spot, even ranking above Chuzhou and Liu Qingzhu. Qingfeng Private High School's principal grumbled that Luoxi had already lost, and every bet was now riding on Shen Guan. He demanded to know if Shen Guan even dared admit defeat, and threw in a reminder about the money invested in him. He called him an ungrateful brat, warning that without repaying that debt, college was out of the question. He pressed what Shen Guan was even trying to pull. Shen Guan laid it out that he couldn't tank that hit, so he yielded to keep himself intact. He pushed back, asking whether the principal would have taken the blow in his place. As for the school's support, he'd repay it over time, but warned that threats held no weight against a warrior stronger than him. The principal begrudgingly conceded the point. The host wrapped things up by announcing the top 4 contenders from this year's college entrance exam: Liu Qingzhu, Chu Zhou, Yi He, and some unknown face. Meanwhile, the leadership chair of An City's #1 middle school observed that teacher Liu had served for years, and it was high time to promote him. Old Liu, fired up, blurted that Yi He was something else. Later, during the semifinal draw ceremony, Yi He remarked that he'd landed first again. Liu Qingzhu registered that she had drawn first as well. The host revealed that the first match of the college entrance examination semifinals featured an internal clash from An City's #1 middle school, Yi He versus Liu Qingzhu. Someone remarked that they'd been waiting forever to see them compete. Another called it the strongest match in An City's college entrance examination history, while someone else labeled it the most hyped face-off since the exam kicked off. Someone pointed out that Goddess Liu probably held the edge. The known intel said she had already grasped 2 mysterious royal martial arts. With just those, she flattened Kai Shaoling, who carried a 3rd-level king bloodline, so no one even needed the reveal of her 4th-level Netherbird bloodline. Someone else brought up that Shen Guan also carried a 3rd-order king bloodline, which had forced Yi He to activate his own. Even though his bloodline appeared seriously high, they figured it was also 4th level, but not quite on Liu Qingzhu's level, who backed it with top-tier martial prowess, and that assessment got plenty of nods. At the semifinals venue, the crowd burst into cheers. From An City's #1 middle school, Liu Qingzhu and Yi He stepped onto the stage. The referee signaled the match to start. Yi He triggered his bloodline on the spot. Liu Qingzhu caught the shift. A dark figure loomed through the smoke. She counted on him being strong enough. The host introduced the match as Yi He against Liu Qingzhu. As soon as it began, Yi He released a burst of steam that flooded the entire arena. The audience murmured in confusion, unsure what was happening since nothing could be seen through the dense mist. The host mulled over how Liu Qingzhu, the talented Liu family girl, would handle Yi He, the surprise standout from that year's college entrance exam, and reminded the crowd to wait and see if Yi He had triggered another bloodline awakening. Yi He acknowledged that Liu Qingzhu's martial arts skills completely eclipsed his. With her strange techniques, no matter how hard he struck, she wouldn't take damage. Someone that sharp in combat wouldn't be easy to beat if the match dragged on. He had to commit early and launch the mountain arresting fist without holding back. Liu Qingzhu assumed that if Yi He rushed in first, she would use his force against him and strike back. But Yi He immediately altered his move. She figured he had baited her on purpose. He announced an incoming punch, then struck with a steel whip instead. Without warning, Yi He opened his mouth. Liu Qingzhu braced for a ranged move, but he lunged with a punch instead. One spectator criticized Yi He for trickery and claimed it was disgraceful toward their goddess Liu, while another retorted that warriors clash and battles don't care for manners. Liu Qingzhu's flow faltered under the misdirection. Yi He pressed in mercilessly and gave her no room to breathe. She surged her martial energy to break his grip and gain distance. Yi He dismissed her effort and lunged again. She braced for martial-powered claws. She dodged on instinct. The burst went off from a distance. Yi He refused to let her retreat. He rained down another flurry of punches. Liu Qingzhu guessed that if he could maintain that level of pressure, his stamina had to be impressive. She had 2 powerful Roya martial arts under her belt. One was the Liu family's secret defense technique, Floating Shadow. The other was a more aggressive one, the Hunyilin Jade Finger. Either would break the momentum, but he never left an opening to use them. Her limit was approaching. If this kept up, she'd fall off the stage and lose the match. She had no better option. A feather emerged from her hand. Yi He blinked in disbelief. Liu Qingzhu figured he was about to unleash his final move, the bloodline transformation Netherbird. Her body shifted and took flight. Wings rippled behind her in midair. The host confirmed it was a bloodline awakening. For the first time, Liu Qingzhu unveiled the magical beast heritage of the Netherbird. Liu Qingzhu alerted that she might not control her strength in this form. Yi He accepted that and responded that it was just as well, since he had only used half his power so far, and figured he could now push himself fully. Liu Qingzhu vanished and reappeared behind him. She released the mystic technique, Hunyilin Jade Finger. He countered with the atomic blast fist. Their clash shook the whole arena. The audience roared at the sheer force. The pressure was too intense to keep their eyes open. Liu Qingzhu staggered back. Her eyes widened. Yi He held firm. His face burned with resolve. Yi He's power burst climbed to another level. Liu Qingzhu remarked that the energy shift felt wrong. The host glanced over, catching the signs. Yi He's magical beast true form had started stockpiling energy. Spikes along his spine swelled with surging force. That force flowed toward his mouth, slow and steady. Without warning, Yi He blasted out an atomic breath beam. Liu Qingzhu rushed to meet it head-on. Her wings folded around her like armor. She drew on her latent ability awakening. The beam slammed in. She responded with feather deflection. The host announced that Liu Qingzhu's feathers had bounced the breath aside. The audience panicked as the redirected beam streaked toward them. A barrier blinked into place, catching the blow. More beams followed. The barrier still held. An City's mayor Huang Qing had entered the scene. He told them to pay attention, claiming the strongest champion in An City's history would emerge today. The host added that Huang Qing had shielded the crowd just in time. Down in the arena, blood hit the floor. Liu Qingzhu remained standing but far from unharmed. She admitted that he broke through her Netherbird's defense in one blow, which left her doubting whether she could win. She remembered how the ancestors had pinned the Liu family's hopes on her, so losing wasn't an option. Their gazes stretched across generations. So failing wasn't allowed. Her mother's voice echoed, reminding her of the years poured into training. All so she could one day bring glory back to the Liu name, so she had no right to falter. It wasn't just about passing the exam, it meant winning again and again after that, but Liu Qingzhu replied that she couldn't breathe. She felt drained. Yi He's strength overwhelmed her. Up against someone like that, it made sense that victory was out of reach. She figured he would notice the opening she left and finish it there. But Yi He didn't move. She wondered why he refused to dodge. He wanted to know where her fire had gone. She froze. He pressed whether she'd ever dared to meet his gaze. He meant to earn the title clean. Her jaw dropped. Yi He hit her across the back. He demanded that she face him like she meant it. He hammered her again, throwing out the question of whether she was ready to stop holding back. And she responded that he was awful, since no one had ever dared hit her like that in her entire life. She clearly intended to give up the win, so she didn't get why he insisted on dragging the fight out. She shouted at him not to hit girls in the face, yelling that he was an asshole. He shot back that if she didn't want to be hit, she'd better get serious. She triggered the taboo martial art, blood ignition, without a second thought. She vowed to bring out her strongest magical beast true form and beat him, just like he wanted. Liu Qingzhu hovered overhead. Yi He remarked on her finally unveiling the true form of her magical beast and noted that things had just gotten interesting. Given that shift, slacking off was no longer an option. He activated Hard Qigong, a body technique fused with the Demura template and dubbed the Nuclear Light Combat Body. He proposed they settle things with a proper fight. Liu Qingzhu beat her wings. A tearing hurricane surged forward. He lunged straight into it. He shattered it using an explosive punch, but she had more left in reserve. She bellowed with full force. She caught his punch. Even then, he stayed steady. He challenged whether she truly believed she held a monopoly on screaming. Energy clustered along his spine. She recognized the same overused move but refused to retreat. She dropped her guard to unleash the Liu family's peak technique. She would meet it without flinching. He unleashed the atomic breath beam. She retaliated with her bloodline power. She summoned her netherworld bloodthorns. The host announced that Yi He's atomic breath and Liu Qingzhu's netherworld bloodthorns crashed into each other with terrifying force. This presented a problem since neither fighter held sway over this kind of overwhelming clash. Huang Qing triggered his gene technique. The divine ley line wall spread across the arena. Still, the collision of power obliterated it. Spectators remarked on the sheer force, wondering if the mayor had erected the wall. Another asked if the mayor had managed to contain the aftermath, while someone else noted that without intervention, the crowd might have been caught in the blast. Huang Qing conceded that his 3 ley line walls were rushed and didn't hold up to usual standards. Ultimately, Yi and Liu Qingzhu's attacks met full force. No one had anticipated two contenders of such caliber in that year's entrance exams. Meanwhile, Liu Qingzhu let out a pained groan. Her magical beast's power had run dry, but she refused to back down. She still had fight in her. Yi approached her. She reflected that her strikes had connected, yet he stood untouched. He warned that if the nuclear radiation in her system stayed, lasting damage would follow. She gritted her teeth. She hadn't even wanted to fight that hard and questioned why he insisted on dragging her into it. He dropped into a seated position. He pressed whether she truly lacked the will to fight or just didn't want to admit her drive to win. When she'd been going all out earlier, her hunger for victory had been crystal clear. She fell silent. She conceded that he was right and confessed she'd considered beating him back then. That was why she threw out defense and burned through everything she had, even though she supposedly hated combat and only wanted to lose fast. But during the clash, she had felt it. That thrill of battling for no one else, just for herself. Yi placed a hand on her shoulder. He observed that her mind was cluttered during the fight. That was the reason she lost, and she noticed the radiation and damage on her arm had already faded. Still, he affirmed she remained the strongest rival he had ever faced. He looked forward to a chance where they could fight without anything holding them back. She turned red in quiet astonishment. The host announced that the smoke had cleared, and the one left standing on the battlefield was Yi. The first match of the semifinals had concluded. Yi, of An City's #1 middle school, had taken the win. The host announced that after Yi took down Liu Qingzhu, Chuzhou followed with a win, just as everyone expected. The biggest moment of An City College's entrance exam, the fight for top scorer, was finally on deck. The surprise contender, Yi, now clashed with the long-standing favorite Chuzhou. Viewership for the live stream instantly spiked to 500 million as the finals kicked off. Chuzhou threw out a challenge to see if he would dare. Yi welcomed it, daring him to come swinging. Chuzhou responded with 7-star steps in full motion. He surged forward, splitting into a wave of sword energy clones. Yi braced himself and readied the atomic explosive fist. He drove his fist into the ground, blasting apart the incoming sword attacks. Chuzhou confessed he couldn't be bothered to search for the real one, so he just attacked all the fakes with blunt force. He clarified that even with his defense, he couldn't handle a straight fight. He wondered if any peer-level fighter could trade blows with him and still stand, muttering that this guy was an actual monster. With close-range combat off the table, he pivoted to draining him from afar. He tapped into Bloodline Awakening, summoning his ice elemental dragon form. He fired off his Bloodline power, releasing a freezing pulse. Someone in the crowd gasped that he literally conjured an iceberg from thin air. With ice powers that strong, he might as well be the ice dragon himself. And another voice gushed over his looks, while a third one cheered for him to crush the so-called great devil Yi. A fourth chimed in to say he had this in the bag. The host noted how Chuzhou's ice pulse carried enough force to shape an iceberg on the battlefield, trapping Yi in its core. But Chuzhou acknowledged that unleashing such a brutal chill had hit his body harder than he expected. One viewer shouted to look, the iceberg was already cracking. A blast then ripped straight through it. Chuzhou questioned how he broke free that effortlessly. He hastily summoned an ice pillar to block the beam. It shattered the moment it connected. Yi revealed that ice dragon powers had never worked on him anyway. He clearly had a natural edge over him. Chuzhou admitted that the strength gap was just plain overwhelming. Yi deserved his final move. It marked the highest limit of his technique, originally meant for Liu Qingzhu. Chuzhou unleashed the soul-damaging sword intent in an instant. Huangqing remarked on the technique, baffled by the fact that someone so young had already reached that level. Chuzhou poured everything into the slash. Yi finally bled, but it didn't change the outcome. He noted that maybe if he found a better sword one day, he might stand a chance. Chuzhou let out a heavy sigh of defeat. His sword had been broken. He questioned how much of a chance he'd even have going forward. Yi joked that it might be a little better than trying to win by being a simp. In the end, Chuzhou yielded. The host officially named Yi the champion of the An City College entrance exam finals. A viewer insisted he'd called it from the start, while another admitted Chuzhou was strong but couldn't keep up with Yi. They declared that Yi, the dark horse, really stayed dark horse till the end. His face lit up every screen around the city as cheers flooded the arena and people dug into his story. Chants of his name filled the stadium. The host addressed his loyal live stream audience who had followed all 24 college exam finals. After 3 days of intense battles, the top scorer had emerged. He introduced Yihei from An City No. 1 Middle School. He mentioned rumors that Yihei's sudden dominance came from hidden buildup and a late-game sprint. Now crowned champion, he wondered aloud if Yihei had anything to share, and Yihei figured that this guy really knew how to make cheating sound poetic. Yihei coughed and explained that first and foremost, he owed thanks to his teacher, who never gave up on him and inspired him when he had hit rock bottom, which brought back his will to fight. Old Lai, however, admitted that he didn't deserve the compliment. He'd been so out of touch with his job that he missed Yihei's potential and now carried guilt over it. Then he spotted the headmaster. The headmaster offered $2 million to hype the school and promised a scholarship. Yihei quickly followed up with praise, saying he also wanted to thank the headmaster, whose leadership got him here. Finally, he gave credit to himself. Without his own effort and grit, none of this would have happened. Out of nowhere, the system congratulated him for earning the title of No. 1 scholar and notified him of a random template ability as a reward. Yihei froze as he realized this template even came with an achievement system. The stadium corridor stayed quiet until someone hollered that Yihei had emerged. A reporter probed whether winning first place had been tough. Another pushed about his sudden progress over 6 months, and someone else pressed about Huadu University. He barked at them to stop tailing him because he needed the bathroom. Still, a reporter jumped in, pressing him on who looked better between Liu Qingzhu and Wu Shanling, or whether he leaned toward Shenquan or Chuzhou, which pushed his patience. He tossed back that he had no time to waste on them, prompting someone to plead for a pause and another to squeeze in one last query. After some time, Yihei ended up at the basketball court. He muttered about finally ditching the press. But apparently, he wasn't limited to a single template anymore, and the system could now unlock more through rewards. Out of nowhere, someone congratulated him on snagging first place, and he squinted, wondering if reporters had circled back. The guy waved it off, clarifying he wasn't media, just someone from Haidu. They needed to talk about genetic locks. Yihei blinked. He hadn't unlocked any. Every power he held came from monster templates, so he raised an eyebrow over how this guy even knew that, and what his real identity was. The guy tossed out whether he'd heard of genetic locks from his father, and he nodded, remembering that the original Yihei's memories confirmed it. Then came the follow-up. Wasn't it weird for a regular taxi driver to know a term that didn't line up with his job at all? Yihei started piecing it together, wondering if a bigger secret lay behind it. The man clarified that because of Yihei's unique case, Huadu could declassify a certain file for him. Yihei almost yelped after glancing at the document. Prometheus, once a biological gene juggernaut on Blue Star, had gotten blacklisted globally after a serious incident. Their core researchers had to go underground and settle quietly. Genetic lock tech had been one of Prometheus's big-ticket projects. He figured they must have assumed his bargain bin dad was a top Prometheus researcher, and that he himself was their hidden experiment. The man soothed him not to worry. The state wouldn't give him a hard time. He just needed to be informed. As someone directly involved, he deserved that. Yihei fired back that if he claimed to be more composed than him now, would he buy it? The man explained that since Yihei was one of the country's key development prospects, full protection was guaranteed. Yihei groaned about how fame brought nothing but nosiness and hassle. Society sure adapted at light speed. The man turned to leave. Yihei muttered that it was about time. The college entrance exam had turned into a jackpot. Not only did he bag a Huadu University admission, but also a $2 million scholarship from the principal, plus an extra $800,000 bonus. The cherry on top was the new template ability waiting to be drawn. He launched the gacha and announced he couldn't hold off any longer. A massive portal flared into being in front of him. He sweated in awe. A second later, a car rolled out of it. He received the D-rank template. He read that it was the supergiant humanoid. It's possible for the ability between templates to be superimposed. So if Supergiant Humanoid template gets superimposed with the Demora template, he mulled over what the result would look like. At that time, he would become the true king of monsters. Meanwhile, an agent approached How Long about whether he meant to handle personal matters and would stop accepting tasks, and he confirmed, so all upcoming schedules should be canceled, which he indicated he understood. There was a dent on the table. It was shockingly pressed by his thumb. This guy carried strength and was out for vengeance. He remembered that an investigator disclosed they didn't find his brother's body in the secret realm, But they located some residues at the last spot his brother's signal showed up. After testing, it turned out that a small amount of nuclear radiation remained. He recalled warning his brother not to get tangled up with society, and questioned why he ignored that advice. Mom had told him to look after him before she left. Suddenly, the host on the TV declared the winner of the An City College entrance examination finals was Yihe, and Hulong concluded he must be a rare genius in An City, so Hwadu University would compete for him. But it was unfortunate they wouldn't witness his enrollment. The next day, Yihe's delivery arrived. He was just about to head to the secret realm to try out his new template when someone sent him something. Chuzhou wrote that, according to the Hwadu Central Research Bureau, a new secret realm crack would appear in An City's Redwood Mountain at 3 p.m. today. It was estimated the secret realm would be around C rank or so. He conveyed an intent to investigate and invited him to form a team. Yihe reflected on what era they were in if someone was still using letters, wondering if Chuzhou might also be a time traveler. Later, he went to An City Redwood Mountain. He observed a huge crowd, probably at least 1,000 people. As expected, a new secret realm pulled a lot of attention. Chuzhou contacted him, and he acknowledged. Chuzhou relayed that he had gotten stronger again, so Yihe speculated he didn't expect Chuzhou to have such sharp awareness. He just used the money earned from the college entrance examination to purchase a few gene drugs and boosted the supergiant humanoid's template compatibility to 35%. It seemed even low-level monster templates held value and could show quick results. Yihe brought up what university he intended to apply for. Chuzhou responded with Hwadu University, and Yihe guessed they would still end up as schoolmates and continue on together. But he noticed something seemed slightly off in his tone. Suddenly, someone announced the secret realm was opening. It was then that a three-headed beast emerged. A warrior announced the secret realm had opened. They had to rip that monster apart and force their way into the secret realm. Everyone rushed in wild formation. The beast wailed about how brutal it was outside, surrounded by warriors, while another urged a fast retreat, and a third snapped back that escape was no longer possible. Eventually, one muttered about how even early birds could get blasted by hunters. Later, they slipped into the Redwood Mountains secret realm. Yihe casually walked alongside Chuzhou. He commented on the thick, stinging scent of blood. Suddenly, someone alerted them to a beast hide, and the beasts had apparently been lying in wait. All warriors by national law were required to prioritize monster elimination and hold the line. They jumped into battle, tore through every wave of beasts. Chuzhou unleashed his bloodline ability. He froze them mid-attack with sharp strikes. One flanked him from behind. Yihe crushed it with his atomic explosive fist. He reminded him to stay aware of his blind spot, and Chuzhou acknowledged the save. Yihe stated that none of the monsters in the secret realm were worth engaging. Chuzhou realized he had already cut down quite a few. The monsters he dropped had bodies warped and melted, so he must have used some kind of large-range nuclear radiation that hit fast, resisted little, and directly targeted the cells of living beings. Right now, Yihe basically moved like a walking nuclear disaster. Someone behind them cursed about how fast the fight had ended and wondered if a top-tier warrior had joined. But another dismissed it and pointed out their An City College entrance exam top scorer was in the mix. He raised an eyebrow, asking if a top scorer counted as a martial artist, and how one martial artist could clear that many monsters. But Baldy cut in and asked if he even watched that year's live exam broadcast, and the guy admitted no, since watching high schoolers fight seemed dull. So Baldy called him a brainless fool, and clarified that just one of those students could flatten 10 of him. Afterward, they teamed up to drive the monsters toward the top scorer. Suddenly, a signal rang out from ahead, confirming the Beast Tide leader had been slain, so victory was theirs. The tide began to pull back. Chuzhou let out a breath, noting they'd at least survived the first wave. Originally, thousands had entered, now maybe 800 remained, many battered. Yihe asked if Chuzhou planned to carry all that loot himself, but Chuzhou asked how he'd managed to collect so many monster cores. Then he handed over his storage ring and told him to toss it all in, so Yihe reacted with surprise, pointing out storage rings were worth tens of millions, and admitting he hadn't pegged Chuzhou as loaded. Nearby, someone announced Wu Sen and his squad had returned. Thankfully, he handled the Lord-level monsters, or they would have collapsed from exhaustion in the herd. Wu Sen introduced himself as An City's college entrance exam top scorer and the head of the Silver Wolf martial arts group there. He had just heard about his group's stories of Chuzhou's combat feats and asked if he was interested in joining. Membership wouldn't interfere with the school and came with various benefits and subsidies. He offered an S-level membership contract on the spot. Someone shouted that Wu Sen personally inviting Yihei to join was huge, and another emphasized how big of a deal that was, since supporting a martial arts career solo was insanely costly. Plus, the Silver Wolf martial arts group ranked among the major ones across Jia Kingdom. Even average Huadu University students weren't considered for S-level contracts. But a woman cut in, wondering why Wu Sen bolted ahead so fast, then figured he rushed forward to round people up. She invited Yihei to join the Chengda martial arts group, admitting their size fell short of Silver Wolf's, but assuring him a 15% cut of the group's monthly training resources if he joined. Someone noted that 15% of cultivation resources practically counted as a stake, and someone else pointed out how a high school student somehow drove the two big martial arts groups into recruitment frenzy. But Yihei turned her down, explaining he wasn't looking to join any martial arts group just yet. Wu Sen chuckled and observed how reeling in the college entrance exam's top scorer wasn't going to be easy. But that was fine. They could be friends instead, and told him to reach out to Silver Wolf Martial Arts Group whenever. While the woman chimed in that Chengda Martial Arts Group would be waiting too, so Yihei replied that even if he wasn't joining, making friends was still on the table. But Wu Sen recalled using his finger to dig earwax earlier and waved it off, figuring he shouldn't sweat the details. Meanwhile, Chuzhou mentioned that now that the beast tide had been driven off, they were free to start exploring, and since the region was basically one massive forest, he suggested heading up to the treetops for a better view and to plan their route, which Yihei agreed to. He soared upward right away, and Chuzhou made a mental note of just how quick that was. Later, they landed on a treetop. Chuzhou looked ahead and wondered what he was seeing. That colossal body had to stand over 1,000 meters tall, completely mind-bending to imagine. Yihei explained it wasn't that hard to grasp, since they were still young and, in a few years, might end up defeating beasts from the secret realms and uncovering their hidden truths. Chuzhou acknowledged that staring down unknown powerful creatures stirred fear in him, but he still believed he could overcome them. It felt like he couldn't measure up, not in martial arts or in willpower. So Yihei came off as a true warrior, and Yihei promised those monster cores would be his eventually. But something felt off, because his life magnetic field normally mapped out the presence of life in the secret realm. Yet there was an amber zone to the southeast that felt like a vacuum, completely deserted. Where there was smoke, there was fire, and the bigger the wind and waves, the bigger the catch. Yihei pointed toward Stud Lake and told Chuzhou to check the southeast and see what was there. Later, they reached the lake. Yihei hollered for Huang Yuli. She reacted with shock over how strong their top scorer Yi had turned out, and someone wondered if she already knew their little top scorer from any city, while another pushed her to hurry up with introductions, pointing out how impressive the top scorer had been against the beast tide earlier. Yihei asked how long Huang Yuli had been there, and she answered that they had just shown up, with two teammates who swam well already heading into the lake to check the route. Suddenly, Yu Yang surfaced. He shouted about a fortune coming their way, and Huang Yuli pressed for answers, demanding how they were suddenly rich. So he revealed a relic lay beneath the lake and they were about to hit it big. She balked at the idea but found it incredible, so rich as it was. Yihei asked what relics even meant and why everyone looked thrilled, and Chuzhou gave a rundown that in secret realms, mysterious structures likely built by ancient civilizations popped up now and then, and those were dubbed relics by experts. Apparently, a bunch of martial arts theory and gene tech used today started with relics. Suddenly, Yu Yang spotted others nearby. He snapped at the pair, questioning who they were and why they were eavesdropping. But Huang Yuli shut him down and introduced them. She explained their power blew past most regular warriors, so they should join the expedition. And Yihei backed her up, telling Yu Yang to calm down and let them help explore the ruins. Yu Yang asked how loot should be split, and Yihei answered that since they were just outside help, he could divide things based on contribution, with more effort earning more share. Yu Yang agreed and said they could tag along for now, but warned them not to get clever. In his view, with the top scorer and runner-up from the entrance exam right there, it made zero sense to turn them into enemies. A moment passed, then they dove into the lake. Yu Yang mentioned that after crossing a cave, the ruins would show up, but something felt off, and he asked where Li Wei had gone, since he'd told him to wait there, and someone guessed maybe he stumbled on treasure and left first. Yu Yang tried reaching Li Wei, but got nothing. Huang Yuli then asked if, after finding the cave, they had even checked for signs of monsters, and he shook his head, explaining they had dumped every monster bait bomb they had, but not one creature had appeared. One member shook as she pointed out how sketchy the place felt, since Li Wei had vanished, and she asked if they should keep going. Yu Yang insisted on moving forward. If she refused to grab the glory and wealth right there, she'd never be anything more than a low-rank warrior. Anyone scared of dying could leave, but those chasing riches should keep moving. No one spoke, so he took that as a sign and pushed on. They moved carefully along the narrow trail. Then came the footprint. Yihe caught the oddity. He murmured that something was off, and Chuzhou agreed, pointing out that the timing didn't line up since she had mentioned their team just got to the lake no more than 10 minutes ago. Still, Yu Yang and Li Wei somehow managed to locate a cave at the bottom of that massive lake, go through it, and stumble onto this secret ruin path. It felt like they were running cheat codes, with full map access like in a game. It was clearly fishy, so he recommended they warn Huang Yuli and leave. Yihe maintained he had no reason to panic, boasting about having a trump card tucked away. Out of nowhere, they reached a new area. Yu Yang identified what lay ahead as a monster core, dull and lifeless, clearly drained long ago, which explained the lack of aquatic magic beasts during his dive, since they must have already been consumed. Huang Yuli contacted him, asking where the relic he mentioned had ended up. Without warning, one of them gestured upward. They recognized Li Wei, lifeless and hanging. The sight struck them with a cold jolt, leaving their bodies shuddering in horror. Yu Yang puzzled over the missing relic, where it had gone, why nothing remained, and if Li Wei was dead, how he had perished. A memory of the vines flashed through his mind, and he urged an immediate retreat. Vines suddenly erupted from his skull. That was when they grasped that he had been mind-controlled. Yihe responded fast, launching his nuclear beam. Radiation seared through the vines, dissolving them on contact. He commented on how nobody would have imagined a monster clever enough to pull this off. After taking down 2 warriors, it had hijacked one's brain and baited the rest into its ambush zone, revealing the entire thing had been a calculated lure. One member pointed out that the monster now blocked the only path back, while another realized it wasn't planning to let them leave. Chuzhou referenced books he had read, recognizing the type as a second-level king-class creature, the Ghost Demon Vine. Huang Yuli rejected that classification, insisting that a true second-level king class defied normal ranking, far beyond what first-level warriors could challenge. Yihe declared he didn't care about its classification and told her to stand aside and watch him blast it into scraps. Then Hulong arrived, addressed Yihe directly, and announced his intent to kill him. A member scanned his chi and blood, identifying him as an 8th-level warrior. Yihe turned around, wondering if someone out there still pined for him. Originally, Hulong had zero intention of heading to the Redwood Mountain secret realm, but after hearing that someone inside used terrifying nuclear radiation powers to help the warriors fight off a beast tide, he instantly pegged that person as Yihe. So once he showed up, tracking the target down barely took effort. Hulong slowed his breathing and slipped in behind the group entering the underground cave, but out of nowhere, they wrecked the narrow tunnel right after stepping inside, cutting off his advance. And even though he froze everything, heartbeat, breath, bodily functions, to mimic suspended animation, he clearly underestimated the one who'd backed his younger brother into a corner. Yihe, meanwhile, had already picked up on Hulong's presence and couldn't figure out why some random 8th-level warrior was hunting him down, so he ran through reasons why the psycho was clinging to him, since he didn't even know the guy, and he had just stormed in, spouted nonsense, and acted like they had history. Hulong instantly exploded with 8th-level blood and energy and punched straight through the collapsed tunnel, forcing a path open and barking out that Yihe needed to brace for death. He caught the shift immediately when a storm of vines burst from the shattered rock layers and whipped toward him. Hulong glared. Cursing through his teeth, he demanded whether this was part of the plan too. The demon vine thrived on draining chi, blood, and martial strength while unleashing nerve toxins, so his state deteriorated while the vine bulked up with every second. If it dragged on, he'd fall here for sure. Huang Yuli, visibly shaken, warned the group that the cave was on the brink of collapsing from the clash. Yihe ordered everyone to move aside. He parted his lips and shimmered with blue light. Then came a thunderous boom. The atomic breath unleashed at full force in a torrent of blue light that looked ready to tear the world apart. Lake water surged through the gap overhead and crashed into the cave as the blocked passage cracked open, and he urged Huang Yuli and her teammates to make their escape first. Hulong roared for them to forget running as martial energy erupted from his body. blasting apart every demon vine in a wide radius. An ice barrier surged outward as a sword technique took shape. Chuzhou held his ground with the blade in hand, making it clear that while he stood, no one would lay a finger on Yihe. Hulong barked back with smug disdain, dismissing the icy counter and throwing in a reminder that he ranked 8th as a martial artist. Yihe answered with a sharp lightning blast and a mocking jab about where his opponent had been looking. He launched a brutal, energy-packed punch. The blow detonated in a massive blue blast that rocked the battlefield. Yihe ordered Chuzhou to fall back, recognizing the enemy as top tier, and choosing to handle it himself. Yihe stepped forward, signaling the others to leave this fight to him. Once the brutal clash ended, the demon beast lay defeated and the lake's surface settled into a shattered stillness. Huang Yuli scanned the ruined area with urgency, trying to spot Yihe as worry crept into her voice. Chuzhou, soaked and wounded, stayed quiet, with his eyes locked ahead and his face set. The ground burst open in another blast of blue energy that shook everything nearby. A monstrous form climbed out of the flare, lightning crawling across its limbs. Hulong broke apart in the air, wrecked by the force. Chuzhou stood tall with Huang Yuli behind him, while the rest stared in stunned silence at what the battle had left behind. A massive burst of blue lightning lit up the sky, shaping itself into a towering humanoid silhouette nested among the clouds. Later, Yihe, bare-chested now, burst from the lake as his companions sprinted toward him. Yihe settled into a cross-legged position on the grass, quietly gathering his strength, while Chuzhou stood beside him, speaking in an even tone. Chuzhou, wearing a doubtful look, tapped his temple, still sorting through the chaos. Yihe ground his teeth and broke into a nervous sweat, privately weighing the option of unleashing his monstrous strength to tilt things his way. Later, Huang Yuli and the others offered polite farewells to the group, vowing to return the favor once they broke free of the secret realm. Yihe and Chuzhou traded a knowing glance, both apparently in tune with the upcoming cheerful massacre moment. 3 days later, at the Redwood Mountain secret realm's edge, they stepped out of a glowing portal. They hit the ground hard. Yihe mentioned the lack of alternatives while both of them stared upward in stunned disbelief. The area had transformed into a budding town packed with transport planes in mere days, the Xia country's infrastructure strength living up to its intimidating reputation. Later, the receptionist reminded him to handle things gently, pointing out that damage wouldn't help him. Yihe apologized, burdened by the sheer number of items, explaining that unless he moved quickly, the appraisal wouldn't wrap up before noon, but the receptionist reassured him of their professionalism. Yihe nodded that it worked for him, and pulled something from a ring. He quietly ran through the count of the 5 oversized sacks. He mentioned the last one was finally out, and she silently questioned whether he came just to shift freight with that much bulk. She asked if he was actually done moving them, her face frozen in disbelief. Yihe confirmed it, but urged her to pick up the pace on the calculations, since he still had plenty of spiritual medicine left to unload. A moment later, at the Spiritual Medicine Appraisal Center, someone confirmed the 7-star leaf had aged at least 300 years, emerged from some tucked-away spot, and usually evaded even seasoned herbalists. Several people clustered around a table stacked with colorful pieces, with one remarking the spiritual medicines would still fetch at least 30 million yuan despite low quality. Another wondering what kind of fortune led to stumbling upon a liu flower, since it played a key role in crafting a qi si pill. Someone else noting how a few spiritual medicines always carried steep price tags due to rarity, and one person informing Lao Shu that whoever dug those up had real skill, not just dumb luck. Yihe figured the green and white quality magic cores did nothing for him anymore, so he planned to liquidate the entire pile. The 5 blue monster cores scavenged from 3rd-level beasts during the beast tide, along with the green core streaked with gold from a 2nd-level king-grade demon ghost vine, stood out as his top haul. Later, he pocketed 27,507,000 and reported that the monster cores had already been traded, leaving the next step to find a buyer for the appraised spiritual medicine. Suddenly, a car pulled up beside him while he stood along the sidewalk. A man introduced himself as Li Yutian, the one running Pinghe Pharmacy, and explained that he'd heard Yihe brought back a stash of spiritual medicines from the Redwood Mountain secret realm, so he offered to buy them at a rate above market value. Yihe figured staff at the appraisal center had spilled his details, but brushed it off since he needed to offload the goods anyway, and now had someone ready to buy. As a car rolled away, Li Yutian reminded Yihe to find him again if more spiritual medicines turned up. He received 7,450,064 and figured that no amount of cash stacked against boosting his power by 10%, realizing that personal strength always stood as the only thing that mattered, while the average genetic potions and the market's green and white monster cores barely made a dent. The template demanded far more than he did as its host, but he didn't hold the credentials needed to access premium materials like blood jade fruit or top-tier genetic potions. He suddenly recognized that there was another option. He mulled over martial arts, relying on the Demora template to take down Liu Qingju and the rest during the college entrance examination, recognizing how far his ability still trailed behind true martial arts masters, settling on the need to secure stronger techniques. As he rushed ahead, he mentioned heading over to collect gold coins from Old Deng. Later, Yihe reached the principal's office at An City's #1 middle school, steam curled above a freshly poured cup of tea. The principal coughed and noted he hadn't expected Yihe to visit his old school, and Yihe waved off the formality, while the principal continued by pointing out that Yihe had ranked first in the college entrance examination, a benchmark for the school in the city. Yihe handed over a jar, explained it was medicinal wine from Li Yuxian of Pinghe Hall, offered as a nod to tradition and respect, and the principal praised him for honoring teachers and excelling both in conduct and academics. Yihe inquired if he had any contacts who could guide him in advanced martial arts, clarified that since college hadn't started yet, his only shot lay with a martial arts family, and the principal reasoned that since he'd already applied to Huadu University and would be accepted, he should stay patient. Still, Yihe pushed back, expressing a deep urge to grow, and the principal offered to connect him with someone, remarking that true educators adjust to individual needs instead of clinging to rigid methods. Yihe doubled down, claiming the rules didn't matter anymore, but people still did, and the education sector had gotten lucky with those willing to adapt, while the principal chuckled and repeated the praise without skipping a beat. The next day arrived at noon. The principal, over the phone, confirmed the arrangements were in place and gave him the green light, and Yihe expressed gratitude before asking which martial arts family had agreed. The principal gave the name, and Yihe, stunned, asked if the Liu family of An City truly intended to pass on their secrets. Later, on the outskirts of An City, a couple tore down the road on a speeding motorcycle. She remarked that he drove incredibly fast and looked ridiculously cool, and Brother Jie brushed it off, claiming he had something even cooler in store. But Yihe pointed out that speeding wasn't the time to lose focus and warned that reckless driving would leave his loved ones sobbing. Brother Jie snapped back, calling him mentally unwell and saying he nearly gave him a heart attack, then demanded to know why he was racing on a busted shared bike. He clutched the motorcycle grip without loosening up. He declared that no matter what kind of status the guy had, he wasn't qualified to stand beside him, and she chimed in that Brother G was just too cool and way too manly. Yihe kept quiet, with a blank look. A sharp sound cut through as both of them stared ahead, eyes stretched wide and mouths hanging open. Yihe pedaled forward, tossing a casual goodbye at little Brother G. A blue streak surged ahead as he blasted past with a sonic boom tagging along. Brother Ga wondered when shared bikes got that fast, and she mentioned they were practically hitting airplane speed now. Later on, Yihe tilted his head up and muttered that this was exactly what he expected from a martial arts clan. He paused outside a massive estate and muttered that their home looked ridiculously grand. The life magnetic field registered several formidable presences. Liu Qingju stepped forward and unlatched the gate. She greeted him with a quick acknowledgement and called out to him. Yihe asked if she was really that unhappy about seeing him, but she doubled down with 2 quick denials, so he followed up by asking if that meant she was happy to see him, but she clarified that her mother sent her out and they should go see her now. She moved ahead as he trailed after her. Their figures showed up in the frame as they passed through the twin doors. Liu Qingju glanced upward and confirmed Yihe's arrival. A foot in a flashy high heel landed on the stairs. She welcomed Yihe with a steady step. She was Qin Lan, the Liu family's head, making her entrance down the staircase. Yihe's cheeks reddened and his eyes widened as he suddenly got it, pulling a mental reference to Prime Minister Cao Cao. After the end of examinations, Liu Qingju returned to the Liu family residence. She stood before her mother. She felt tense while attempting to open the conversation. Qin Lan remarked there was no need for tension. She had watched the live broadcast of the battle between her and the boy named Yihe, and she had performed well because his strength was such that even if he joined the Huadu College entrance examination, he would still emerge as a dark horse. So there was no need for self-blame. Liu Qingju kept her silence. Jinlan remarked that her younger brother possessed limited talent and could not inherit the Liu family. So in her generation, she was the only one able to shoulder the Liu family's responsibility. Yet she remained a girl, and she was also strikingly beautiful. With her father having passed away early, the Liu family lacked a master to support them, forcing the family to retreat to Small An City. So if a powerful family sought to marry her, they would have no right to refuse. And that would mean the Liu family would be destroyed, and the century-old foundation surrendered to others. She intended to pair the two of them and inquired about her opinion. She remarked that Yihei was exceptional, with remarkable talent, a modest family background, and a bright future. And from her observation, he was certainly not someone with wolfish ambitions. But she did not have to answer yet, and should first spend time with him. In the present, Qinlan welcomed Yihei to the Liu family, and he cleared his throat as he greeted her and mentioned it was a small gift for her. She remarked that she had heard from the principal of Nerva 1 Middle School that he wished to learn advanced martial arts, and when he confirmed it, she stated that Liu Qingzhu would show the way. He wondered why she agreed so easily. She stated that Liu Qingzhu would take him to the Liu family's martial arts pavilion, and since the martial arts there were not allowed to be taken outside, he had only one day to learn within it. There were 3 Xuanwu martial arts stored deep in the martial arts pavilion, and whether he could learn them depended on his ability. He acknowledged it and expressed thanks to the Liu family in advance. She considered whether he was thanking the Liu family instead of her personally, and she concluded that it seemed he meant to make a promise to the Liu family, which was very good because they would surely hold him to it in the future. He was a clever child, and the more she observed him, the more she liked him, while he wondered why her gaze on him felt strange. Moments later, Liu Qingzhu guided Yihei toward the martial arts pavilion. He queried why it seemed she was avoiding looking at him, and she denied it. He pressed whether it was true. She countered by asking why he was getting so close to her. Shortly after, they arrived before a huge stone door. She explained that it was made of Huali stone, a rare stone excavated from the secret realm that could dissolve the attack power of the Xuanwu master level without breaking, and he inquired whether he could punch it. She replied that he could try, while inwardly noting how odd his mind was, and wondering why he was not showing awe toward the stone's qualities. He gathered energy into his fist, preparing to strike. She recognized the blue glowing punching technique again, which stirred unpleasant memories in her mind. He struck the door. It did not move in the slightest. He remarked on the strangeness, saying that upon contact it felt like punching the sea, sinking into mud, with more than 90% of his strength absorbed, and she told him they should proceed, as she would lead him to select the martial arts, all while noting that he also experienced moments of failure. She explained that the martial arts there were divided into body movement, defense, horizontal training, swordsmanship, and so on, and whichever he wished to learn he could use his identity card to access, and he then inquired about the Xuanhuang martial arts. She informed him that they were stored in a small stone room at the deepest section, which also required the card to enter. However, he would not be able to fully comprehend Xuanhuang martial arts in one day, and could only learn a little. So she believed her mother granting him permission was not necessarily beneficial, and instead she could select a few martial arts books for him that were second only to Xuanhuang martial arts and better suited to him. He asked whether she was considering his benefit, and as she decided she did not want to converse with that infuriating person further, he declared that she need not worry about him because he understood his own path, and if he were to learn, he would learn the strongest. For if he lacked the courage to tackle Xuanhuang martial arts, he might as well return home quietly. He then asked if that door was a black power stone, and she stated that the secret room holding Xuanhuang martial arts was naturally more secure, and that such a black-colored power stone was extremely rare. To collect enough for building that black power stone wall, they had been gathering them since her great-grandfather's era. The room became illuminated, revealing vaults inside. One bore the label, "The Devil in the Flesh." She explained that learning Xuanhuang martial arts was not a matter of viewing, but of sensing the martial rhyme left by its creator. And if he could not sense it, or if his attributes conflicted with it, he could not begin training, as Xuanhuang martial arts were alive, and it was the martial arts that chose the martial artist, not the reverse. He declared it perfect, the devil in the flesh, and proclaimed himself the heaven-sent chosen one for it. His excitement swelled when the vault opened. Then he remarked that the Xuanhuang martial art was not a book. He asked whether it was a statue. Yihei sat in front of a massive statue. He inquired if this counted as sensing the martial rhyme and if he had entered its world. He remembered how earlier he had brought up whether the Xuanhuang martial art was not a book but a statue, and Liu Qingzhu explained that they could be statues, paintings, or utensils, as anything could hold martial rhyme, making it one of the mysterious arts of martial masters. Only martial masters could condense martial rhyme and bind it to objects to pass on their mantle to later generations. The rest was left to him. And when he pressed her about it being entirely up to him, he pointed out that she had not even instructed him on how to learn from the object. She told him to sense the martial rhyme, and if fate aligned, he would sense it. He had no clue what to do. He then asked if it was truly predetermined by fate, and remarked that he might as well take a nap. Meanwhile, in the observation room, Liu Qingzhu commented that it was just like him to act that way. Back in the present, he checked if he was correct that the martial rhyme was some kind of spiritual world, and remarked that he currently had no martial qi, and even the nuclear reaction of the Demora template could not activate, leaving him as weak as an ordinary person again. The system abruptly notified him that his consciousness had entered a special space, so to prevent sudden death, it would bless his spiritual body, and he noted with relief that the monster template remained intact. The martial arts master declared that only a real man could inherit his martial arts, otherwise he would let them rot in the ground. The boy was to prove he was a man of iron. He recognized that the person looked identical to the statue. The master explained that when the thunderstorm came, hundreds of ghosts would roam at night, and he would guard the broken temple for him, warning that the angry-faced bodhisattva must not be defiled by evil ghosts. And if he succeeded, at least he could grant him the ability to guard the house. But if he failed, the ghosts would drive him insane and destroy any chance of practicing martial arts again. So, if he lacked courage, he should run away. Water dripped from the ceiling. He wondered if it was raining. He then remarked that it appeared the trial had begun. Moments later, a sword appeared in his hand. At the same time, the evil ghosts emerged. He remained unfazed. He stood firm by the door with the sword raised. He then swung the sword at the evil ghosts. He cut them down and defended the temple. He noted that as expected, the trial would not have a warrior face hundreds of ghosts unarmed, and there had to be hidden props. He lunged at the ghosts without hesitation. He swung the sword while enjoying himself. The master remarked that the hundreds of ghosts in the Wuyun trial were the evil spirits of his own master, and that a mere martial artist daring to leave the protection of the ruined temple was courting death, concluding that the trial's participant at that time was another fool, and that martial artists had been declining with each generation. He ended up having to collect their bodies himself every time. One ghost attacked Yihei from behind. The ghost froze when its attack passed straight through him. The master questioned whether none of the ghosts could get near him. He noted that in the spiritual world, the system would automatically shield him, making him immune to attacks. He wondered if that meant he had an invincible golden body there. He then unleashed a brilliant golden light that dissolved the ghosts. The master observed that he was unaffected by the martial rhyme's effects and questioned how he accomplished it. He claimed that it was simply due to diligent study and practice. The master accepted it as a fine excuse and, since he could subdue hundreds of ghosts, promised to honor the inheritance, though it would depend on whether he could receive it. He reacted with mild surprise at a loud crash. The statue collapsed, revealing a well beneath it. The master explained that the well contained the essence of the evil spirit he had condensed in life, along with the technique of the devil in the flesh. Before he could finish describing the outcome if it were refined, Yihei plunged headfirst into the well. The master fell silent briefly, then remarked that it was good, since it was the first time he had seen a young man with such a distinctive personality. At his peak, he had been a hero who passed through an S-level secret realm. He had lived and died using the devil in the flesh, but as he aged, his chi and blood had weakened, and the evil spirits bound in his body began to rebel and spiral out of control, even killing those around him. To prevent further harm, he could only end his life, and before death, he fused his soul, steeped in vengeful spirits, with martial rhyme, and cast them into the statue. Although the evil spirits had faded somewhat in that martial rhyme world, they still exceeded what a mere martial artist could endure. So if he could suppress them, he would surely surpass the master on the path of the devil in the flesh. Meanwhile, Liu Qingzhu and Qin Lan monitored Yihei from inside the observation room. Liu Qingzhu grew tense. She addressed her mother and demanded to know what was happening. Qin Lan and Liu Qingzhu were in the observation room. Liu Qingzhu mentioned that when Yihei had just fallen asleep, He wore a smug smile, as if enjoying something pleasant in his dream, but now he was suddenly twitching and bleeding all over. Qinlan explained that the third Xuanhuang martial art had been obtained by her grandfather by chance in his later years, and he had attempted to practice it before, but even with his grandmaster level, he was directly rejected by the martial arts in the statue and sustained internal injuries. Since then, no one in the Liu family had managed to master that martial art, and because its power was extraordinary, the method to obtain it must be unbearable for ordinary people. With the old saying about wearing the crown and bearing its weight feeling apartment, she began to bring up Yi, his choice to accept the power of that martial art, but she did not manage to finish. Yi. He awoke and stretched with a huge yawn as if nothing had happened. Liu Qingzhu addressed her mother and remarked that Yi He's ordeal in learning that martial art did not seem as intense as her earlier description. Meanwhile, Yi He expressed thanks to Emperor Guangla for teaching him the martial art, and Emperor Guangla acknowledged him as the most talented person he had ever seen, suggesting he might uncover the truth of the secret realms, a task their predecessors had failed to accomplish, which he would now entrust to the younger generation. Yi He countered that the assessment was wrong and admitted to having cheated during the trial. The flesh and blood confined by the demon, the body resembling Shura, and despite no increase in his panel attributes, he had mastered the Xuanhuang martial arts, doubling his combat power at least. Abruptly, Qinlan inquired if he had learned it. He confirmed that he had. She pressed on, questioning how it was possible, and remarking that even with Liu Qingzhu's talent, mastering a Xuanhuang martial art would require a week without sleep in the martial rhyme, asking how much time he had taken, if it was truly only an hour, and if he had really mastered it after a brief nap. Liu Qingzhu reflected that others called her a genius, but the real genius was right in front of her. He noted that the two seemed doubtful, so he offered to give them a demonstration. It was the evil spirit he had acquired from the martial rhyme world. If explained plainly, it functioned much like an enchantment in a game, capable of merging with martial energy to enhance its lethality. Liu Qingzhu sensed the strength of its aftershock and believed she heard a ghost-like howl, wondering if that was the evil spirit he referred to. Qinlan found herself in awe of Yi He. He noticed her daughter remained at her side, and pondered if she could restrain herself a bit more, since he had no desire to be addressed as Prime Minister. Liu Qingzhu then brought up that since he had already mastered one Xuanhuang martial art, she asked if he wanted to learn the other two, given that he still had the entire day left to train. Qinlan considered whether her daughter was truly foolish or merely pretending, since she had claimed she did not want to be with Yi He, yet was now offering their entire fortune to him, reasoning that while she might be investing in him and preparing to take him as a son-in-law, handing over all the Liu family's assets was too much. Meanwhile, Yi He explained that there was no need because one Xuanhuang martial arts book would keep him occupied for a long time, so he would not take up other martial arts for the moment. And then he turned to Qinlan and mentioned that he felt a bit tired and had matters waiting at home. She responded with agreement and mentioned that Liu Qingzhu could escort him. She relayed that the housekeeper had told her he arrived on a shared bike, and while inquiring if he could drive, she suggested he choose a car from the garage and take it, since that would be more convenient for him. He mulled over the idea of a car and realized that the motorcycle belonging to the guy he had met on the way over was quite impressive, stylish, and striking. He inquired if Qinlan owned a motorcycle, to which she confirmed, and while asking if he enjoyed riding them, she noted that he shared the same interest as her troublesome son, so she would give him the best one in her collection. Elsewhere, Qinlan's son mentioned that he had heard from his Aunt Hong, the housekeeper, that his mother had brought in a live-in son-in-law, and he intended to see who the person was since his sister was not only talented and beautiful, but a rare genius beauty in Ann City, unmatched by most. That guy on the shared bike earlier had been infuriating, as he had scared away his new girl, so the man had better hope they never cross paths again. Suddenly, Yi He sped past him. He wondered if the one who had just gone by was the same person on the shared bike, and if that was his motorcycle now. As evening settled, Yi He parked the motorcycle outside his home. Inside, he remarked that the monster core he had swallowed dry last time had tasted unpleasant. This time, he would add sauce to improve the flavor. He decided to eat the blue one first. His panel attributes had increased, and there were even some points available to allocate. Previously, in the Redwood Mountain secret realm, he had used the supergiant humanoid template, reaching about 50 meters in height, and while that could be called enormous compared with regular monsters, It was still tiny compared with the mysterious mountain-sized creatures of the Redwood Mountain secret realm. It needed to be larger, so he allocated the points to the giant template. They would consume the golden monster core of the second-level demon vine next. Suddenly, immense power surged through his body. The system informed him that after absorbing the genetic sequence of a plant life form, a special mutation had occurred, and it inquired if he wished to prevent the template from mutating. He asked about the nature of the mutation. He acknowledged that mutation meant the template would gain additional attributes, and if those attributes were beneficial, it would be fine. But if detrimental, it would count as a negative evolution. There was no hesitation. He would gamble and turn a shared bicycle into a motorcycle. The system then congratulated him on unlocking the S-rank nuclear template. He felt overwhelmed by the massive creature looming above him. The system notified him that when the Savage Trace Demora template reached full completion, there would be a 2% chance of evolving into Star Universe Demora. He remarked that the name alone carried immense power, but since it required the current template to reach 100%, he would have to focus on upgrading it quickly. Suddenly, sirens rang out beyond his home. He wondered what was happening and whether it was a terrorist attack. One of the officers ordered that they should seal off all exits in the park and not allow them to escape, while another insisted they should search every inch until nothing was left unchecked. Meanwhile, Yihe heard a knock on his door. He remarked that the original owner had been a recluse with no friends visiting at that hour, no food deliveries, and no packages expected. So he wondered who could be outside. He then turned to Yao Yimei to see if she knew who it was, and she remarked that it appeared to be a little brother who clearly was not an ordinary martial artist. Originally, she had only planned to stash something there and alter his memory for convenience, but since he had discovered the truth, she resolved to make him suffer enough that he would not dare to run. He decided to drop the matter since his savings were enough to buy another house, and she questioned what he meant. He explained that he meant she was already dead. On the other hand, Zhou Yi was locked in combat with the police officers. One of the officers noted the opponent had revealed a flaw, while another urged that they bring him down. Zhou Yi instructed that Yao Yimei must get the golden gene out because he was serving as a decoy for her. They could attack as much as they wanted, since trading his life for theirs was more than worth it. And he unleashed the blood-burning forbidden technique. He then demanded to know if there were still enemies. He glanced at Yao Yimei and remarked that her nano battlesuit had been white before, but now looked black as charcoal. He reminded her he had risked his life to let her take the item, so she should leave with it, and he pressed her on what her problem was. She relayed telepathically that she had hidden the item so they should retreat. They released a dense smoke to distract the officers. They slipped into a manhole. A short while later, they emerged in a dark alley. Yao Yimei remarked that they had finally lost the police, and Zhou Yi observed that the nano armor had already repaired itself after the impact. Yihe suddenly addressed her as a beautiful lady and brought up that she had yet to explain why she broke into his home. She should have realized the serious issue at that moment, that she had randomly chosen what she thought was a lucky neighbor, but had instead picked him, the big boss, and as a reward for breaking in, he intended to have some fun with all of them. Zhou Yi demanded to know how he had found them. Yihe sensed the nuclear radiation lingering on Yao Yimei's body, but he dismissed it and told him that if he could fight, he should stop talking. It was the perfect opportunity to test the flesh-bound demon technique on him. Zhou Yi realized the situation was turning bad. He attempted to block Yihe's attack, but it broke through his defenses. The evil spirit swept through his body. His face turned pale and he coughed blood. Yihe launched another punch. It connected, slamming Zhou Yi into the wall. Yao Yimei remarked on the impressive martial arts skills and inquired which master Yihe had trained under. He declared himself a disciple of Emperor Guangla, and she noted she had never heard of him and never imagined the small city of Ancheng to harbor so many hidden masters. Suddenly, Zhou Yi warned Yihe not to get arrogant. He declared himself a dignified 6th-tier martial artist, far beyond the reach of a mere martial apprentice. He stomped heavily on the ground with monstrous feet. He advanced toward Yihe with confidence. Yihe responded that he liked it more. Meanwhile, Yao Yimei assessed that Yihe likely had no idea her nano-battlesuit had stealth capabilities, and that she was the real attacker. But Yihe told her to stay out of his way. She was sent crashing into the wall. Zhou Yi berated Yao Yimei as a useless fool for failing an ambush. He decided to handle matters himself. Yihe stated that they were leaving. He met Zhou Yi's punch head-on with his fist. He questioned whether the defense power had increased so much. Zhou Yi boasted that his true form, the iron-crowned rhinoceros demon beast, could withstand a tank barrage and demanded to know what could possibly break through. He added that his attack power had also risen sharply. He promised to send him to hell. They ended up in a forgotten stretch of town where even the streetlights seemed to have given up. Zhou Yi jabbed that Yihei was nothing more than a brat, and no matter how much swagger he carried, he still couldn't measure up to his iron-crowned rhino. Then he pressed to know where the kid had gone. A sudden crushing aura rolled in beside him, making him stiffen in surprise. It belonged to Yihei's towering humanoid form, a massive template given life. He blurted out what the hell it was. He rattled off questions about whether it was a demonic beast, where it had come from, and if the little brat had somehow turned into it. Yihei's enormous hand lunged down to flatten him. Zhou Yi slipped clear just in time. Yihei followed with a kick that tore at the ground. The stomp landed right where Zhou Yi had been. Then came the fist, swinging hard and fast. He poured out punch after punch, hammering Zhou Yi without pause. Right now, he loomed in an ultra-gigantic anthropomorphic state, every stat in his body sitting at a monstrous 23.8 to 29.4. From a short distance away, Yao Yimei took in the sight of Zhou Yi getting pounded into the dirt. She cursed herself for being such an idiot, wondering why she had ever picked a fight with that monster. If this kept up, Zhou Yi would end up a corpse, which meant she'd never escape and would have to fight to the death. Moments later, she perched atop a building near Yihei's position. She dove off, launching herself straight toward him. She noted it was a molecular line drawn from nano armor, sharp enough to slice through high-grade alloys. Even with a giant's frame born of some genetic trick, he still carried human weak points. Her strike hit clean, the molecular line severing his head. The severed head landed at her feet as she straightened. She asked if she'd actually done it. To her shock, the head's mouth opened, spewing a surge of violent energy. She spat that he was a monster. The last thing she registered was a flood of blinding blue. The blast tore dust and rubble across the street. Yihei stepped free from the crumbling remains of the giant head. He closed in on Zhou Yi, who lay battered and coughing blood. He told him it was his turn now. Zhou Yi rasped that he was a monster. Yihei replied that anyone who kills should be ready to be killed. Sirens screamed somewhere nearby. Zhou Yi gave a harsh chuckle, vowing to drag him down too because Yao Yimei had stashed something in his room called the Golden Gene. He claimed it was already his, and now Yihei would be hunted without end for it, so he'd better run, because he'd be waiting for him in hell. Yihei shot back that he'd better run his ass off and quit talking so much. With the cops closing in, he needed to deal with the body fast. Maybe he'd gone too far this time. A short while later, he slipped back into his apartment. He pinged Qinlan to ask how the police questioning went. She replied that it was fine, but things had been tense lately, so he should lay low until Huadu University started, and he assured her not to worry because she knew him. He was the most well-behaved guy ever, earning a small note of approval from her. He remarked it was a good thing he had warned her first. Otherwise, after unleashing a signature-level nuclear blast, the cops wouldn't have ignored him so easily. He then wondered if the Golden Gene was the same thing those two had been talking about. He recalled spotting that symbol before, in the Prometheus file given to him by someone from Huadu. It was the logo of Laserbird, a heavyweight in biotech. It seemed those two had stolen it from Laserbird and gotten hunted down on the run. From Zhou Yi's parting words, the mess had been dumped squarely on him. It looked like it was time to relocate, so he decided to crash at a hotel for the night and figure things out from there. Hunters roamed the B-class secret realm in the inner region of Swan Lake. One of them checked how the day's haul looked, and another replied that it was decent enough to net a small profit. Without warning, she turned toward their captain, urging him to look because something was off. The horizon ahead bled red under the crush of monsters surging toward them with savage momentum. A massive, mountain-crushing python bellowed and hurled itself into the water, with countless others plunging in after. Perched atop the python's back stood a throne. Seated there was the 5th-tier sovereign-class beast, the blood-eyed black ape. Someone urged they contact the military at once to report a sovereign-class beast leading a massive tide, while another muttered that City would never withstand it without grandmasters and senior grandmasters on the field, cursing at how high-tier monsters almost never left their own turf and demanding to know why this one had pushed into a low-tier zone. The Sin Wolf lounged on its throne even as the tide moved. Its eyes snapped open without warning. Beneath it, the mountain-crushing python unleashed a crushing sound wave. The contact relayed the emergency to the military, stressing the Sovereign-class appearance at Swan Lake and the spreading tide. He called for reinforcements, but his second attempt to transmit cut short. The military confirmed the Sovereign incursion and ordered an immediate response. Meanwhile, the Sinwolf rose from its throne. It commanded them to move at full speed. The tide shifted toward the Secret Realm's entrance. In the city, word spread that a massive beast tide was surging out of the Swan Lake realm toward An City. Arrival was pegged at 20 minutes, and the military rushed to the front lines. The call went out for all martial artists in An City to rally. Every available fighter pushed to the front. At the train station, the officer in charge urged citizens to keep calm and hold order. He declared trains reserved for children and students only, calling them An City's future, and if the city truly fell, they must survive. In the mayor's office, Huang Qing pressed for confirmation of reinforcements and asked who was sending troops, only to hear from his secretary that An City was not alone. Beast tide warnings were hitting the nation. Every city stretched thin. Even those untouched by incursions were hardening defenses, so no help was coming. He pressed about Huadu, asking if they could spare even one grandmaster. Huadu's neighbor, Guanshan City, was locked in an S-class realm outbreak. Every high ranker committed there. No time remained. The battle for An City would rest on their own strength. Elsewhere, Yihei sparred with Chu Zhou at Chu Sensei Gym. Yihei drove a punch forward, and Chu Zhou caught it on his arm. The blow still shoved him back. Yihei remarked it was impressive he'd taken that hit. Chu Zhou pressed him on when he'd picked up Black Tortoise style, and Yihei admitted to starting a month back, still rough, before challenging whether Chu Zhou had actually grown weaker in just that time. Chu Zhou countered that he hadn't gotten weaker. Yihei had gotten freakishly strong. An City's beast tide alarm cut into the air. A broadcast prioritized boarding for An City's university prep students, directing them to the airport for flights B521 and D753, or to An City Rail for train A423 to evacuate now. And Yihei asked if Chu Zhou wasn't considering leaving. Chu Zhou turned it on him, saying with his talent he should run. Yihei dismissed the talk, tossing back a jab about when Chu Zhou had turned sentimental, and finished that if they were both staying, there was only one thing left: fight. Meanwhile, Liu Qingzhu stood in the Liu mansion declaring she would join the defense, but Qinlan cut in to ask what her odds were of surviving, pointing out the city's 30,000 martial artists barely grew to 50,000, even with retirees and volunteers, and against a tide that size, they were boats in a tsunami, ready to be swallowed whole. With a sovereign-class beast in play, An City had no hope. Only grandmasters could match one, and her life was not hers alone. It belonged to the family. Liu Qingzhu had no words. She finally declared that a martial family unwilling to fight monsters deserved extinction. She stormed out, slamming the door. Qinlan turned to Aunt Hong and ordered preparations to leave An City, and Aunt Hong asked about the boy, Yihe. Qinlan told her to send him a message and leave the decision to him. The martial artists had gathered in the Swan Lake secret realm. Old Zhang prodded Old Chen about showing up at 60 instead of getting his granddaughter to safety, and Old Chen barked for him to piss off, snapping that if a cripple like him could come, then a man with all his limbs had no excuse. Old Zhang muttered that he still couldn't believe they were here again after 20 years, facing another beast tide side by side, and Old Chen agreed, pointing out it had been that long since the last one took his leg. He asked if Zhang planned to retire at his son's place afterward, teasing that Panluo was flashy and Zhang was just a country bumpkin. But Old Zhang replied that he'd rather stay in An City, share a chessboard with him, and die where he'd been born. The martial artist surged forward into the beast wave. At the Swan Lake secret realm entrance, Huang Qing reminded the troops they were An City's final line of defense, so they had to stay sharp and let nothing through, and they acknowledged in unison. He laid out that 60% of An City's military and all warrior-ranked martial artists and above were already inside. They were the vanguard with one mission: gather intel on the beast tide, especially the Lord-class and Sovereign-class monsters, and survive to report back. Then, a lone martial artist staggered out, bleeding heavily. Huang Qing snapped for the medics to treat it as an emergency. The man rasped that the USB drive carried all the Vanguard's battle data. When Huang Qing pressed for the others' whereabouts, he said they were all dead. The beast tide had obliterated everything, leaving not even bodies, And they should beware the blood-eyed black ape because it had set them up. Without it, thousands might have survived. A massive rock suddenly hurtled out from the secret realm. It smashed into the tower, and falling debris tumbled into the minefield below. Huang Qing suspected it was targeting the mines under the tower, aiming to wipe out the unfinished defenses. He cursed, called it an attack from inside, and ordered every weapon to fire back and blast the monsters to hell. Artillery thundered at the entrance. Huang Qing noted they weren't sending beasts but softening them up with long-range fire, wondering since when monsters used human tactics, then cursed them again. He shouted that the second wave was incoming, with even more stone projectiles. The rocks crashed into tanks, explosions choking the air with dust and debris. A soldier suddenly spotted a beast behind him, warning they were under attack, right before it bit his head clean off. More creatures swarmed in, devouring soldiers one by one. Huang Qing barked that stone spikes were being launched through the rift like artillery, ripping apart their rear line, and they had to intercept them mid-air before impact. At the entrance, the beast wave gathered. The black ape declared humanity was nearly finished and told the soldiers to trample the land until nothing stood. The beast poured out, tanks firing into their ranks. The military was swiftly overwhelmed, crushed beneath the tide. Elsewhere, Yihei stood on a building's edge. He reflected that no one knew what would become of the city after today. He'd grown attached to An City and refused to let monsters ruin the life he'd fought to make, so he would fight. Across the city, students were also in the thick of battle. One of them remarked that Luo Xuan never disappointed, with 5 beasts already down, and Luo Xuan answered that it wasn't bad. Kai Shaoling jabbed at him, saying a handful of low-tier kills hardly justified calling himself An City's #1 at third high, and called it a joke. Then Chu Zhou arrived. Someone pointed at the blue core in his hand, asking if he'd soloed a third-tier beast, and as Chu Zhou noted he hadn't expected to run into them, he questioned if they hadn't evacuated. They explained their parents were martial artists fighting outside, so as their kids, they weren't going to run. Luo Xuan suddenly warned him to watch out. A tank was flying straight toward them. The beast tore through the city without restraint. Luo Xuan demanded to know who in their right mind had dropped a tank there. Chu Zhou drew his sword in one fluid motion. With a sharp arc, he split the tank clean in two. The severed halves slammed onto the ground with a deafening crunch. Kai Shaoling blurted that it looked like that one. Luo Xuan pressed if it wasn't the Lord-class beast that appeared first, wondering how it had reached their rear lines, and Chu Zhou told him to calm down, pointing out the size and aura didn't match a Lord-class. The beast abruptly swung its fist toward them. Chu Zhou speculated it might be an elite. Yihei blasted it with a fierce beam of blue energy out of nowhere. The hit barely hurt it, though smoke curled from its head. It lunged to grab him. He knocked its hand aside with ease and landed square on its face. He announced it was time for dental care. The beast froze in surprise. He pried its jaws open by the teeth. He remarked on the foul stench and demanded to know how many people it had eaten. He promised a thorough rinse. His beam lit its mouth from within, shredding its body inside out. Luo Xuan noted the beasts were now fighting each other and urged they escape while the chaos lasted. But Kai Shaoling told him to relax. It was Yihei, prompting Luo Xuan to ask if that little beast was really him. Chu Zhou confirmed, adding that with him here, An City might actually survive. Yihei called out that Chu Zhou could handle this zone, while he reinforced the other fronts. He shot upward instantly. From high above, he scanned the city. He searched for the largest beast concentrations and decided he had found them. Meanwhile, soldiers emptied their guns into a beast. One shouted that firearms were worthless against that thing and urged using bayonets. Blades flashed into their hands. They charged without hesitation. In moments, the beast skewered many on its horns, and others were crushed underfoot. A soldier called to his captain, insisting they retreat since they were just regular troops and couldn't stand against such monsters, but the captain ordered them to hold. He swung and decapitated a beast in a single strike. He reminded them that as soldiers, their deaths would buy time for civilians to flee. Then a soldier demanded to know what those things were, and the captain guessed they might be martial artists. Yihei's sinister ghost coiled around the beast and bound it tight. He blasted its head with his blue beam. It crashed to the ground instantly. He turned the other beast toward him. His Thunderfang cleave ripped through the air. He plunged into them, detonating in a violent explosion. At other fronts, the beasts were falling back. A martial artist wondered if they were reinforcements, but quickly decided they were converging on a single point. Another recognized Yihei, An City's top scholar, now in the thick of the fight, and noted the beasts were swarming him from all sides. The first declared they couldn't let him be surrounded and ordered everyone to move. He was still just a kid and in City's last hope. They would cut down the monsters and protect their top scorer. Yihei dropped another beast with a shot clean through the skull. The battlefield lay carpeted with mangled, blood-soaked carcasses. Anything that dared breach his firing range exploded into nothing but meat and bone before it could get close. One martial artist warned the rest that a Lord-class beast had locked onto Yihei and urged them to shield him. Another barked that anyone aiming to kill in City's pride would have to cross him first. Someone else roared that humanity would triumph and the monsters could rot in hell. Another urged them to hold the line because reinforcements were on the way. Another snapped at the old veterans, wondering if they couldn't even keep a kid safe. And another shot back that they'd better cover him before he got too busy to cover them, because if he went all in and the line collapsed, they were done for. Meanwhile, a beast was tearing into Huang Qing's defenses. It slammed into one of his walls. He kept the monster boxed in behind those barriers. He remarked that the Earth Vein seal wouldn't hold back all the primal beasts, so the only way to end the tide was to bring down the Sovereign. Then one beast used his own walls as stepping stones to spring at him. It shot into the air and came straight for him. Huang Qing pressed his fingers together, power pooling between his palms. A golden beam erupted, tearing the creature's head apart. A sudden surge of killing intent from behind made him stiffen. It was the black ape's mount. He identified it as the mountain-crushing python, a fourth-tier king species, Lord class. He judged it to be the black ape's deadliest mount, and if the sovereign's pet was stepping in, that monkey was feeling the heat. He dropped from the air. Power flooded the ground beneath him. He unleashed mountain-crushing Dominator Hammer. The python watched, coiled and wary. Then the earth and the surrounding buildings ripped upward into a colossal ball of energy over its head. Huang Qing taunted it, pointing out that his Earth-type attacks weren't for show and that he'd baited it on purpose. The python faltered in surprise. He called it out for falling for the trap and triggered Burst Martial, Serpent Surge. A follow-up strike, Outer Peak Earthquake Strike, sent the serpent shrieking. The sound shattered building windows. Massive stone spikes erupted from the ground. They skewered buildings and shoved the debris aside. Huang Qing considered himself lucky to have intel on it. Without that, the death toll would have been catastrophic. He noted that if the beast had gotten fully into the city, weakening it would have been almost impossible. But with only its head exposed, it was practically begging to be butchered. Another skill flared and his hands multiplied. He pummeled the python with blinding speed. The monster lashed back, fury twisting its movements. Huang Qing braced his arms to shield himself as more spikes burst forth. The serpent's head vanished under a crown of jagged stone. He acknowledged that for a king species, it wasn't surprising it could sprout spikes from its own body. Behind him, hidden in one of those spikes, the black ape watched. The realization struck him that it might be an ambush. Before he could act, the black ape's grip closed around his skull. It mocked him for daring to harm its mount, calling him a foolish human. Huang Qing recognized it as the blood-eyed black ape and realized it had been hiding inside the spike all along. The black ape promised to crush his head, so all could see how insignificant humans were before it. Then it smashed him into the python's skull. The city stood bristling with stone spikes. The black ape remarked that while the explosion came and went in a single flash, he had confirmed the truth. There were no strong martial artists left in the city, meaning he could slaughter everyone without a hint of restraint. Huang Qing was already battered and bleeding. He stayed quiet, glaring hard at the black ape. He began shaping a cluster of smaller stone spikes in his grasp. He unleashed his skill, Bladewind Tempest. The black ape declared his resistance meaningless, nothing more than a delay before the inevitable. Here on this battlefield, he had no rival left to threaten him, and the fight had turned into a game meant to drown humanity in fear and despair, where the sight of the strongest humans wearing hopelessness and fear would be the finest spectacle. Huang Qing lunged at him without a shred of warning. The black ape met the strike without a flicker of alarm, letting it shatter uselessly. He commented that the move was quick, but still pitifully weak. Huang Qing then hurled an enormous chunk of the city toward him. The black ape called it strong, but far too slow. He slipped away with effortless grace, bounding across rooftops. He ordered Huang Qing to kneel, declaring he didn't tolerate lesser beings meeting his gaze. His speed caught Huang Qing completely unprepared. The blow sent Huang Qing slamming into the ground before he could dodge. The black ape's interest sharpened. Huang Qing managed to land on both feet. He leveled another glare at his enemy. The black ape demanded to know why he felt no fear. Huang Qing spat a curse and claimed the ape wasn't half as clever as he believed, that in the end, he was only an arrogant beast who had miscalculated. He invoked his skill, the blood forbiddance technique. The black ape wondered aloud if he had been drawn into some hidden formation. Huang Qing answered with another skill, Earth Vein Seal. The black ape mocked him, asking if he thought burying him underground was enough, calling him naive. He warned that no seal would last, and the moment it weakened, he would rip apart every human he found. Huang Qing scoffed, claiming it was no mere backup plan. It was a hymn to humanity, to courage. He drove his hand into his own chest. The black ape demanded to know what he was doing. Huang Qing explained that at the very start of the war, he had buried NCIT's sole strategic nuclear warhead beneath this battlefield, with the trigger lodged inside his heart, so that if his heart stopped, the warhead would detonate. The black ape accused him of bluffing, asking who would gamble their life on such madness and whether he thought he'd fall for it. Huang Qing declared he never intended to leave alive anyway because he was Huang Qing, mayor of NCIT. He remembered his inauguration when he swore to give everything, his duty, his body, and his life, for NCIT and its people. Back in the fight, he remarked that perhaps he had finally done enough. The nuclear warhead armed itself. Huang Qing accepted his fate as it detonated. A massive explosion roared to life. A mushroom cloud rose high into the sky. Far away, the captain received a message that a colossal mushroom cloud had climbed from the earth like a gravestone. Tears ran down his cheeks. He and the soldiers raised their salutes. Chuzhou and the students lowered their heads in solemn respect. Every martial artist who had made it out in time stood in silent reverence. It was a funeral, etched for the legends. A gaping wound scarred the city where the explosion had torn through. The black ape's skeleton still lay there, grim and unyielding. Without warning, the core in his chest flared alive. It tore free from his body, unleashing a surge of raw power. That surge wrapped him, stitching flesh back over bone. The process was blisteringly fast. It reached his skull in moments. Eyes formed in his sockets once more. He remarked that it was absurd to think a lowly human had nearly ended him. He vowed to butcher every last soul in the city, dragging out their deaths in the most hideous ways imaginable. For now, he resolved to retreat to Sin Domain, rebuild his blood and chi, and then erase this place from existence. Yihe's voice cut in, demanding to know where he thought he was going. The black ape recalled that human, one of the deadliest threats to the invasion, a terrifying prodigy. Yihe declared that he had finally found him, lamenting only that his timing was a touch late. He lunged at the black ape, his fists flared with the radiant energy blast. But then his expression shifted in surprise. The black ape mocked him as a foolish human genius who, instead of hiding, had strutted into the open, making this the perfect time to kill him. Yihe replied that had he fled, even his mini-nuke might not have caught him, but since he was so desperate to die, he'd gladly oblige. The black ape spat curses. His form warped, swelling into a hulking anthropomorphic beast. Power surged and coiled in his chest. The detonation was colossal. Some martial artists watching from afar muttered about the blast, wondering if another warhead had gone off, if this was Huang Qing's trap, and remarking that the man truly had prepared for everything. On the battlefield, the black ape stood charred, his body withered. He muttered that Yihe was a monster. Yihe now loomed as an armored titan. The black ape admitted he was more beast than himself, his aura eclipsing even most king-rank beasts. Yihe snapped that he was nothing like them, bald chimps. His massive foot came down, the black ape slipped free. Yihe warned the little monkey there was no point in running, then unleashed mountain-shifting, sea-flooding strike. The black ape cursed, insisting a sovereign should never be underestimated. Their strikes collided in a punishing exchange. The black ape was hurled into the dirt. Yihe observed that he was sovereign class through and through, even wounded, wiry, and twitching like the monkey he was. In Titan form, Yihe's physical stats had soared past 30 in every measure, yet the beast still resisted, even managing to damage his arm, though it healed instantly. The black ape admitted his last blow had been everything he had, and it had done nothing. He couldn't beat this genius. He repeated it again and again as he fled. Yihe gathered power for another strike. He snarled that the filthy beast wasn't worthy of tainting Huang Qing's sacrifice. Radiant Pulse Strike tore from him. The black ape cursed the human genius once more. Yihe remarked that the monkey had gone underground pretending to be dead. Playing dead meant only one thing. It feared discovery. And with the creature more battered than ever, this was his best shot at ending it. He then pressed if sovereign-class beasts could fully suppress their life force, and added that had he found him earlier, Huang Qing might still be alive. But with the ape gravely injured, even its stealth would fail, and Yihe would sense even the faintest flicker of life. He had the filthy ape cornered. He unleashed a concentrated beam of energy. It struck the black ape as it tried to crawl away beneath the earth. The black ape spat curses, grumbling that he had been so close and could already feel Sin Domain's entrance ahead if not for that human mayor. His eyes widened when Yihe's massive fist hurtled toward him. The blow sent him crashing into the ground. Yihe declared it the price for staining Huang Qing's sacrifice and swore to make him beg for death. The black ape warned him not to push his luck, calling him a worthless little insect. He vowed to burn the last of his core's power and drag Yihe to hell with him. One of his arms regenerated fully. He promised Yihe's death. Yihe clenched his fist. He met the black ape's punch head-on. The collision shattered the Titan's arm entirely. Blood sprayed from the wound. The black ape groaned in pain. Yihe pressed if that was a suicidal strike. He told him he had nothing left, so he was finished. But a dreadful melody abruptly reached his ears, and he clutched his head, muttering about his spinning thoughts and demanding if this was a mental attack. He pressed if another beast was involved. Suddenly, countless hands flooded the battlefield. Yihe warned him not to even think about escaping, but then he demanded to know if those hands were sprouting from his joints. He gritted that his joints were jammed and he couldn't move. He then challenged if the ape truly believed that would stop him. Heat built inside him until it hit 1,000 degrees. The hands burned away. He barked that they should taste fire hotter than 1,000 degrees and unleashed his skill. Wicker flame howl. Meanwhile, the black ape muttered that he was almost at the entrance. Shock crossed his face when Yihe came into view. He was wreathed in fire and charging straight at him. The black ape urged his unseen allies to hurry, snarling that the little pest was closing in and literally ablaze, so they needed to run. More hands erupted without warning. The face behind the melody revealed itself. Yihe demanded to know what it was and whether it was a beast or demon. He questioned if such power belonged to a sovereign, and admitted that if its true form appeared here, he would be finished in an instant. The battlefield lay in ruins. The other beast shielded its eyes with both hands. Suddenly, it snapped them open. A piercing, jagged scream tore out of its throat. Yihe grimaced through the pain and demanded to know why that wail still echoed in his skull when he had already shut down the giant servant's auditory system. He let out his own raw scream. Then he challenged the monsters, demanding if they truly believed they could stroll out of an city like nothing happened after what they had taken. He told them to keep dreaming. A surge of his energy flooded into the Titan. It brimmed and swelled with unstable force. He disengaged from it in the next breath. He called it a gift from their city, a hometown specialty, a nuclear warhead, so the demon had better savor it. The Titan barreled toward the beast, seconds from detonation. Horror locked the beast in place, and it unleashed another shriek. The world vanished in a massive blast. Meanwhile, one martial artist urged the others to check the secret realm fracture, and demanded if it had blown up. Another warned that something was off because the beasts just lost control. Another pressed if Huang Qing had actually pulled it off. Another cautioned them to stay sharp and not waste Huang Qing's sacrifice. And another declared that On City still had a fighting chance. Maybe it was the blood-eye black ape's body smashing into the boundary that broke the beast's flow. But whatever the reason, the invasion from the secret realm stopped cold. Martial artists swept through the streets, slaughtering the stragglers in a rage that burned for a full day and night, until no beast drew breath. The battle for On City was over, though nearly 80% of its defenders had fallen. Yihe, on the other hand, lay unconscious at the nuclear blast site, his eyes flicked open without warning. He demanded to know how long he'd been out and explained that he had poured every scrap of nuclear power in his core into that servant for the blast. Yet the site still crawled with radiation and lingering atomic force, which seemed to have recharged his outer shell in the fallout. That fight had been a slaughter. Huang Qing had baited the black ape into the blast zone and crippled it in the explosion, and Yihe had been forced to blow himself up repeatedly to finish it before the brute could drag him away. His infinite monster template was formidable, yet still no match for a sovereign-class beast. The win had been nothing but terrain, timing, and dumb luck, and next time he would have none of those, with no clue when his next template would unlock, and it might not even be the gold tier. so merging with the Star Thunder Titan template was still his fastest path to peak combat strength. To do that, he needed high-grade plant-type monster cores that matched the fusion template, especially blue, purple, or gold, and mastery of the Xuanhuang martial arts, because if his template could align with the martial rhythm field, body refinement would be essential. The Xuanhuang techniques grew slower than template abilities, but their ceiling was higher, and maybe that was why he had been brought into this world at all. 1 month after the An City crisis, the city raised a monument to Huang Qing. Yihe lounged at the park, scrolling through videos on his phone. The report claimed beast tides had struck 18 cities across Xia Nation, with 12 completely overrun. Guanshan City had vanished into an S-class secret realm and an untraceable gray mist, prompting the Great Xia Dragonfinch organization to dispatch 30 Zhuanwu martial artists and 5 grandmasters, led by Du Jingming. It was no routine invasion, as even S-class realms emerged. Xiao's top guardian, Fu Musheng, had gone into Guanshan himself and vanished from contact at the perimeter, returning 48 hours later, barely alive with only 2 grandmasters. And now Guanshan was marked as the 12th global death zone, its death toll over 1.8 million. Yihe muttered that even guardian rank martial artists had perished, and as he questioned whether humanity's survival on Blue Star had truly sunk that far, he declared he could not sit idle any longer. Moments later, he turned to Qinlan and told her he needed her help. She asked if he wanted the Liu family's other 2 Xuanhuang manuals. He wondered aloud if that was what she thought he was after and clarified no, he needed her help gathering high-quality plant-type monster cores, preferably blue, purple, or gold tier. She remarked that he was after the rarest of the rare, that Lord-class cores cost a fortune, and demanded to know what he was offering in return. He replied that Huadu University was holding a realm trial for new students, and he would partner with Liu Qingzhu to take first place. She warned he was underestimating the other city elites and admitted frankly that Liu Qingzhu sat in the mid to upper tier, nowhere near the top, so even if he had beaten her in a spar once, he was still far from the true monsters. He countered that if anyone could restore the Liu family's legacy, it was him. And as he pressed her, if that was not the reason she was backing him in the first place, he offered to sign a promissory note that if he could not help her win, he would serve the Liu family for life, as her servant, bodyguard, or even caretaker. Her interest sharpened at the words "for life." She agreed to help him, but only this once. Yihe headed straight for An City Central Hospital. One person there claimed to be his fan, another wanted his autograph. A third remarked that the martial top scorer looked perfectly fine while they were all wrecked. And yet another repeated rumors that he'd taken down a mountain of monsters during the invasion, while Yihe apologized to a lady, explaining he wasn't adding anyone right now, but thanked her all the same, privately mulling over how he never thought he was this popular. Moments later, he reached Ward 6, where Chuzhou and Luo Xuan were staying. He broke into a grin, tossing out that if it wasn't An City's most handsome Chuzhou, then asked if he was already down bad. Luo Xuan greeted him and checked if he had the right person, Yihe himself. Yihe wanted to know who he was, and when Luo Xuan introduced himself as Yihe's first opponent in the tournament, he pressed if Yihe had already forgotten him. Then Yihe's gaze caught on his leg. Luo Xuan warned him not to stare like that, insisting the leg wasn't toast yet, and worst case, he'd get regeneration surgery or slap on a combat prosthetic. Since Laserbird had just released a new model, Yihe figured losing a leg that young while defending An City made him a real one too. His phone rang out of nowhere. He griped about endless spam calls being downright irritating. Then the principal's yell came blasting through, ordering him to pick up already, which made Yihe check if it was actually serious. The principal explained he had blocked a big shot from Huadu, so he better unblock him now, and Yihe acknowledged it, almost calling him an old man before catching himself. Soon after, Yihe was on the line with Wang Tao, who introduced himself as Huadu University's admissions officer, informing him their semester started early, that a dedicated train would pick him up in 3 days, and asking if he had any special requests. Meanwhile, Professor Liu turned to Chuzhou, stating he was from Huadu's admissions office. Yihe replied he'd follow the university's arrangements, while Chuzhou confirmed he'd be there on time and thanked Professor Liu, leaving Luo Xuan to figure there were 3 people in the room, and he was the only one not top tier, so he might as well give up the bed and claim a spot underneath it. Yihe mentioned that before enrollment there was one thing he still needed to handle. Days later, Yihe stood at the Swan Lake crater, where the tactical nuke's mushroom cloud had hurled hundreds of tons of ash into the upper atmosphere, shrouding the entire region in a gray haze like an unending night. Some rays of light slipped through the dark clouds. They fell across Yihei, who sat cross-legged on the ground in meditation. Smoke drifted out from his body. He opened his eyes. He remarked that his clash with the blood-eyed black ape had bumped Demora's sync rate up by 1.5%, a huge leap, and 3 more days of training had raised it another 6%, so that spot had been worth every second. But it was time to get moving. He rose to leave. At the station, the person in charge pulled everyone's focus and announced that train G6666 to Wadu West would depart in 5 minutes, urging all remaining passengers to board at once. Chuzhou stood on the tracks with his luggage. He figured Yihei had arrived. A bright streak cut through the sky. Yihei landed on the tracks beside Chuzhou. He mentioned he'd made it just in time. One passenger wondered aloud if that was Yihei. Another swore they'd assumed a high-tier beast had shown up from that pressure, and someone else pointed out it wasn't Bloodflame Aura, but something far beyond elite warriors, so it could only be in City's pride. Chuzhou observed that Yihei had gotten stronger again. Yihei stated he was finally leaving In City behind, his first stop since transmigrating, the place where it all began. He gave his farewell to On City. His sights were set on Huadu. Moments later, they were aboard the train in motion. Chuzhou told Yihei not to make everything so intense. Yihei asked if everyone on the train was a top scorer, and Chuzhou replied that not just that, the entire train was built from next-gen alloys, able to take thousands of tons of force without a dent, with at least 5 Xuanwu martial artists guarding it, some hidden, some visible, and maybe even a grandmaster, since it carried the most elite freshmen in Xia Nation. Yihei figured, from the life sense he'd swept through the train, that there were indeed a few true powerhouses aboard, but maybe only 5 who could last 3 moves against him. Suddenly, an announcement hit that they were at Alert Level 1, because the Wadu University train was under attack by unknown forces. It was announced that professors and staff were assessing the situation, so all students should clear the carriages at once and keep their hands off the enemy. One of the students blurted that no way was this for real, and demanded who'd have the guts to hit a Huadu train. Wondering if this was just some rookie hazing for the freshmen, another countered that it didn't have to be that because Xian Nation was scraping the bottom right now. With their top national rank martial artist in closed recovery, one of the 3 grandmasters, Du Jingming, gone missing, and a handful of grandmasters and Xuanwu-class fighters wiped out during the beast tides in Guanshan and other cities. Another remarked that it tracked for old enemies and foreign powers to start poking around, and another tossed out if they should just ditch. Meanwhile, Chuzhou tossed Yihei a question on what he thought, and when Yihei pushed if he was serious, he replied that he'd been grinding non-stop for days and was going to crash for a bit to recharge. But then he got to his feet. He remarked that whatever, they should just go see for themselves. The train kept rattling forward while they made their way toward the front carriages. Out of nowhere, Yihei called for Zhou Jingxian to hold up and pressed him on what was happening ahead. Zhou Jingxian relayed that the first 3 carriages were already overrun and the enemy was working some kind of dimensional field, pulling people into a sealed-off space so the fights wouldn't spill out. And inside, something nasty was hunting everyone down the Xuanwu instructors posted there. Most were already gone and they'd gambled everything to shove him out so he could warn them, and it was no drill. The carriage buzzed with murmurs. Yan Zhengxiong then pressed him for proof, and remarked that if the front was such a death zone, he'd better show them. He pushed on where the teacher's seal was, if any other survivors were around, and why only he made it back. And he tossed in that he had a friend up front who was strong enough to rank first among new students, so there was no way he'd be alive, and his friend wouldn't. One of the students remarked that it made sense. Another agreed he had a point, and Yan Zhengxiong declared that he should move because he was heading up front. He slid past Zhou Jingxian in a hurry. Zhou Jingxian urged them to wait, and he insisted he wasn't lying, and it was suicide to go in there, demanding why they wouldn't take his word, and saying they were charging straight into a meat grinder. All of a sudden he asked if he was right in thinking that he was Yihei. Yihei caught that life sense was pinging some odd emotional spike from him, and when he confirmed it, he pressed him on how he knew. Zhou Jingxian explained that a girl named Liu Qingzhu had shown him his photo, told him to find him, and told him whatever he did, not to go forward. Yihei pressed if she'd actually told him that. Zhou Jingxian confirmed she had, and that she'd taken a blade for him and gotten seriously hurt while covering his retreat. Everyone else might be barreling toward their deaths, but he swore to carry out her last wish to keep him breathing. Yihei cursed and snapped that she wasn't even dead yet, and he was already handing out her last words. Chuzhou checked if he was going, and he confirmed without hesitation because he'd given her family his word. Zhou Jingxian retorted there was no chance and he wouldn't let him through, and Yihei barked at him on how he'd even gotten into Huadu with that pathetic mindset. He then shifted toward Chuzhou. Zhou Jingxian insisted he was trying to save him, and when he demanded why they were all so hard-headed, he scoffed about them just jumping into brawls and questioned how Liu Qingzhu, who was a graceful girl, could possibly know two street punks like that. Yihei cut him off and said enough talking. Zhou Jingxian scoffed that with that power, he wasn't even in his league, and Yihei told him to pop that blood chi pill because he needed it more, and time was running out. He turned back to Chuzhou and said they should move, and Zhou Jingxian repeated that they shouldn't because it wasn't safe. A short while later, they reached Carriage 3. Yihei remarked that this must be the doorway to the dimensional space Zhou Jingxian had mentioned. They should chuck something in first as a test. He hurled a suitcase into the portal. He noted that there was nothing. No sound, no feedback, and even life sense came up empty inside. But plenty of freshmen had gone that way, so they had to already be in. He remarked that it was interesting, so they should head in. He blinked slowly open after crossing the portal. He grumbled about his head and demanded who was running the show there. He remarked that it was odd because they'd gone in together, but Chuzhou had vanished. There was a light ahead, so they should move toward it. A few beats later, Yihei demanded what in the hell this place was. He noted that life sense was gone and questioned if it was being blocked. He figured he should stick to what worked. He then landed on the rooftop of a tall building. He barked that they should quit hiding and playing games. They should blow up right now. Yihei unleashed a massive explosion. One of the students blurted out a question about what that blast even was. Another chimed in, wondering what kind of circus act they were witnessing. A third cursed, demanding to know which powerhouse was showing off like that, and griped that it was way over the top. Meanwhile, Chuzhou charged straight toward the explosion, already certain it was Yihei. Liu Qingzhu, leaning against a wall, spotted the blast outside. She identified Yihei and told him not to come. Yihei remarked that it looked like his arrival had caught more than just his classmates' and teammates' attention. The enemy had clearly noticed too. A man in a pig mask closed in from behind. Yihei demanded to know what was with the pig mask, accusing him of looking shady as hell already. Then cursed and called him a faker, insisting they rip that ugly thing off his head. The pig drove his blade forward. It pierced Yi's torso, yet Yihei blew his head clean off. The pig remained unharmed. Yihei wondered if the guy had taken his nuclear fist head-on without even flinching. The pig tried to yank the blade free, but it was stuck. He tensed in alarm. Yihei pressed if he hadn't expected him to heal so fast, pointing out that his muscles alone could jam the blade. His strength was nothing special, but that blade was, cutting through his defense like paper. And Yihei demanded to know what kind of freak he really was. He said he should get a closer look. The idiot deserved to eat his spit. He was a simple man, and since he'd said he would rip that thing off, he meant to rip it off. Suddenly, he caught on that there was something inside the mask. It turned out to be a pendant. So it was a Huadu trial. Beat the monsters, take the loot, classic setup. That masked head guy's weapon was likely reinforced with a high-level martial artist chi, making it absurdly sharp. But once the chai faded, it was just scrap metal. And Yihei asked what the deal was with the pendant and if he needed to hunt down more masked weirdos to snatch pendants from their helmets. It felt like a battle royale, which suited him fine. He then used his evil ghost to catch an incoming arrow and snap it in half. He questioned if another wave was already coming. He spat that he hated sneak attackers. Then an arrow suddenly shot up from the floor, catching him off guard. The masked person loosed more arrows. Yihei couldn't dodge all of them, but he challenged if they really thought they could kill him so easily, calling them naive. He then transformed into the armored Zodiac unit. The masked person's alarm spiked as Yihei's punch came barreling in. The blow tore through every floor of the building until the person crashed to the ground. Somewhere else, a student exclaimed that the entire building had been leveled. Back at the fight, Yihei said whoever had almost skewered him earlier, he was about to see their real face. It turned out to be a rabbit mask. So it really was Zodiac-themed. The rabbit dug his feet into the ground for momentum. He lunged straight at Yihei. Yihei aimed a kick, but the rabbit twisted effortlessly in midair to evade. Yihei scoffed that they had to be kidding him and asked if the rabbit knew kung fu too. Then his eyes widened as a massive spear came for him. Chuzhou suddenly unleashed his ice wall. The buildings around them buckled and came crashing down. The rabbit stood trapped inside a towering wall of ice. Chujo remarked that it was already cornered and pressed Yehei to leave the creature to him, but the rabbit leapt up with sudden agility and slipped past his strike. It groaned sharply, bracing itself for retaliation. Clutching its spear, it lunged with blistering speed, yet Chujo deflected every furious thrust. The rabbit froze mid-assault when the tip of its spear turned to solid ice. Chujo flared his power outward and hurled it back. The rabbit slammed into the scattered slabs of concrete. It blinked in shock as it realized Yehei had transformed. Yehei's massive hand hovered threateningly above it. He declared with a mocking grin that he had finally caught the little cutie. Then he unleashed a devastating torrent of energy. Meanwhile, one of the students pressed his companion about why it had suddenly gone quiet there, and he muttered that she better not be telling him the guy who made that flashy entrance was already gone. And she answered bluntly that he probably was, since 10 of them together couldn't leave a scratch on those masked freaks, whose weapons sliced through anything, leaving them hopelessly outmatched at this point. She scoffed that the fool who came blazing in with the light beams was just some clueless bumpkin from nowhere who lucked his way into Hoodie. She continued that the gap between top scorers from the big cities and small-town nobodies was staggering, and she'd heard that Yan Zhengxiong and Ouyangze from Modu, Lan Yusi from Shendu, and Xin Chen from Liuli Island had already started hunting masked ones, though she had no clue how they even managed it. The guy pressed if they were really that strong and remarked that he figured this year's freshman champion would definitely be one of them. But she countered flatly that it wouldn't, because the top student always came from Huadu. And up against those Huadu monsters, the rest of Xian Nation's students stood no chance, since the martial resources they grew up with weren't even in the same league. Both of them jolted when Yehei suddenly fired off another overwhelming beam. The guy blurted out whether that outrageous blast earlier was some kind of railgun, and as the girl snapped at him not to be stupid, she shot back, demanding how in the world a railgun would show up there. Meanwhile, Yan Zhengxiong and his crew also caught sight of that blazing beam punching through the sky. Yan Zhengxiong pressed Ouyangze for his opinion on it. Ouyangze remarked that the style of the strike didn't match the masked ones at all, so in his eyes it was probably the handiwork of some freshman. Yan Zhengxiong pressed again, wondering if it truly was a freshman, then added that aside from the Huadu elites, nobody else should have that kind of firepower. But either way, they needed to go check it out. Ouyangze reminded him that between the two of them, they had already secured the rat, dog, monkey, and horse pendants. He pointed out that Lan Yusi from Shendu likely carried the goat pendant. He noted that Xin Chen from Luli Island probably held the snake pendant, while the rookie Lu Qingshu apparently wiped out the minotaur and swiped the ox pendant. If the masked ones really did follow the zodiac cycle, that meant only 5 were left: pig, rabbit, rooster, tiger, and dragon. And when it came to the dragon, both of them knew that was basically a death sentence encounter. A boss you only fled from, never fought. As for the rest, whoever unleashed that blue beam clearly had at least a handful of pendants, and Xin Chen and Lan Yusi were bound to be pulled into that mess too, meaning the game was hitting its final stage. If victory was the goal, then they would need to rip those pendants right out of others' hands. Meanwhile, Yehei was clutching the pig pendant. Chujo pressed him on what it was, and Yehei revealed that before Chujo even arrived, he had already dropped a masked fighter with a pig mask, pried the boar pendant from his helmet, and guessed that this whole trial boiled down to collecting every zodiac pendant hidden in their heads. Chujo pressed him again, asking if they were actively hunting masked ones. Yehei confirmed without hesitation, adding that back on the rooftop someone had tried to take a sneaky shot at him. It was probably another masked fighter, one who slipped away during the confusion. But since his arrow grazed that foe, he could still trace him, and Chujo urged that they move out. A few moments later, they arrived at a site littered with the wreckage of a recent clash. Yehei pointed out the battle traces, noting someone had beaten them to it. Those burn marks still gave off heat, meaning their target was close. All at once, Chujo caught the presence lurking nearby. Without delay, he channeled his ice skill through his sword. The strike landed on Lan Yusi, who had been lurking just ahead. She clicked her tongue in annoyance and demanded to know how her optical stealth had been pierced through. Chujo pressed if Lan Yusi was lurking nearby and plotting something shady. Out of nowhere, Xin Chen remarked that she should shift aside, then he unleashed his skill, Gene Art, Flame Demon Physique. Right after, he triggered his move, Demon Pendant Strike. He mocked Lan Yusi, asking if she was exposed and scoffing that her optical stealth felt flimsy, and she snapped back that he should just keep his nose out of her business. Yihei pressed them both on whether they were lying in ambush, and Lan Yusi countered that he was getting the wrong picture because they had just dropped a guy in a chicken mask and were hiding out to bait the rest of the masked crew. Shin-chen casually sparked his cigarette to life. Yihei pushed further, asking how Lan Yusi planned to explain herself, if that story was true. He effortlessly clamped his hand around her decoy's throat. She blurted out if even her decoy had been sniffed out, admitting that the two of them clearly had some skill. And Shin-chen dismissed that he never really expected a sneak attack to work anyway, since that would just be dull. He told her to watch him demonstrate how it should be handled. His cheeks swelled as he dragged in a massive gulp of air. When he blasted it out, it thickened into a wave of dark smoke. Yihei and Chuzhou instantly backed off to steer clear. Lan Yusi barked that they shouldn't even dream of running. She cast her skill, Wind Rise. She whipped the smoke and hurled it across the whole area. Shin-chen declared that he was far from finished, and now it was time to push the fire higher. He spewed a scorching beam that torched the battlefield in raging flames. He jeered that it made no difference if they had the power, because they still couldn't bring him down, and they should see if the dumbass still had the nerve to grin after that. Yihei suddenly clapped his hands together with a sharp snap. With that one casual move, the dense smoke choking the area immediately vanished into nothing. Shin-chen pressed if he seriously just clapped and blasted away his entire flame cloud. As he demanded to know what kind of monstrous physical strength could pull that off, Yihei unleashed his skill, Mountain Blocking Fist. He slammed a punch right into his face and launched him through the air with a bloody trail behind. The impact hurled him far, and he crashed onto the ground, rolling over and over. Lan Yusi mulled that none of them had stepped into the true martial artist rank yet, every one of them still stuck at the martial disciple level, their physical growth sealed by an unseen wall. And even Huadu freshmen barely held an edge at that point, but this guy, his body tore past anything a first year should even touch. Suddenly, she cursed inwardly, realizing she'd been so fixated on his fists that she ignored the ice guy completely. Even teaming up, she and Shin-chen couldn't stand against those two monsters. Dragging this fight any further was pointless. She tore free from the ice, shackling her feet. Her mind snapped to one thought. She had to bail. But Yihei's hand clamped around her leg in an instant. She cursed again in fury. He barked that she should get back there. He was about to unleash his Zhuanhuang martial arts, but she fired off her skill, Hollow Chaos Steps. He pressed if she was already running off. Then he drove out his flesh-bound demonic art, Shadow of the Demon Realm. She screamed out that her body refused to move. She demanded to know what the hell those twisted things were. He declared that she couldn't fight or flee anymore, so it looked like it was time to surrender. Lan Yusi declared she would surrender and let Yihei scoop up every pendant she had. He approved with a sharp grin, saying that was the kind of attitude he liked, and told her to start spilling everything she knew. She admitted that to clear the trial, he needed to collect all 12 Zodiac pendants. And since they were already in the final phase, he didn't even have to hunt anyone down anymore because everyone would be gunning straight for him. She added that the real monsters that year were Ouyangze and Yan Zhengxiong from Modu, and by that time they had probably already stacked up half the set. She offered to lead him to them, while in the back of her mind conceding she had no chance of winning anyway, so she might as well throw fuel on the fire and let the big dogs rip each other apart. Yihei waved it off, telling her there was no need for her trouble, though she had more nerve than he expected. Meanwhile, Yan Zhengxiong and Ouyangze sprinted toward their location. Ouyangze remarked that Shin-chen and Lan Yusi were probably hunting them already, and Yan Zhengxiong coolly noted that it didn't matter who won, because they would just rob the survivors afterwards, treating them like prize carriers. Then Yan Zhengxiong snapped at Ouyangze to look at that body. It was Shin-chen, sliced clean in half. They recognized him instantly. Just minutes earlier, Shin-chen had been completely crushed and tossed aside like trash. He admitted Yihei was inhuman and Lan Yusi must have already gone after him, and figured he was probably marked too, leaving him no choice but to throw in with Ouyangze and Yan Zhengxiong. Suddenly, he demanded to know who was there. The dragon strode out, menacing and unhurried. Its eyes, with double pupils, glared coldly at him. Shin-chen stammered if that was the dragon. The streetlight snapped off. Then it flickered back on again. By then, Shin-chen's body was already cleaved apart. Blood splattered everywhere. The dragon walked away with the pendants clenched in his hand as Shin-chen's body hit the ground. Back in the present, Yan Zhengxiong stated that Xin Chen was dead with brutal slash wounds. Chu Zhou muttered it had to be the dragon, because that ruthless surgical strike killed him instantly, and only the dragon mask Zodiac could pull that off. But Yan Zhengxiong insisted that the dragon was supposed to be locked up in the underground parking garage, and he had dragged over 20 people down there to hunt the beast. Only 2 of them crawled back alive. He still reeled from it, convinced it was meant to be a trial and not a massacre. Yet the blood soaking the floor had been all too real. Ouyangze stood drenched in sweat, trembling under the weight of fear. Yan Zhengxiong pressed him on what they should do now, since Xin Chen's pendant had vanished as well. Ouyangze declared that if the dragon was roaming free, then they must have triggered some hidden condition, maybe wiping out all the other masked Zodiacs. And with the final boss loose, just like the masked Zodiacs automatically hunted freshmen, the dragon would stalk Zodiac pendant holders. Taking it head-on was suicide, so their only shot was to gather the remaining pendants before the dragon devoured them. And then he unleashed his skill, Bloodline Awakening. His body tore and reshaped until he became the golden-winged rock. He declared that they needed to send out a signal to pull the other pendant holders in, and everything would be decided in one final clash. With a thunder of wings, he soared into the sky and blasted out his overwhelming energy. In the dead city, Liu Qingzhu muttered that all they were supposed to do was ride the train to Huadu. But instead, they had stumbled into that cursed nightmare, and so many freshmen had been butchered by the dragon mask lunatic. The teacher had tracked them down, but only one student had managed to escape, and she couldn't bring herself to run, not in that way. She swore that she had to warn that fool Yihe, because he couldn't be dragged into this mess. She wondered if the one who escaped had reached him, and with a bitter curse, she admitted she didn't even have the strength to go herself. But with Yihe's monstrous power, as long as he didn't cross paths with the dragon, he could live. Then, out of nowhere, she felt Ouyangze's presence. Her gut twisted as she wondered if they had tracked her down. She realized that in her condition, she couldn't outrun them, and they had already locked onto her energy, which meant they were coming for her pendant. She didn't even care about the thing, but some instinct screamed that Yihe would need it, and since she couldn't face them directly, there was only one play left: lead them away. Meanwhile, Ouyangze immediately recognized Liu Qingzhu. He remarked that he had looked into her during the college entrance exam when she awakened the Ghost Sparrow bloodline, a freakishly rare avian type. And she also happened to carry the Ox pendant, which was a lucky break, and clearly she was heading somewhere. He pressed her, asking if she was trying to lure him straight into the dragon's lair beneath the parking garage, then mocked her as a silly girl because the dragon was already unchained, and that place was nothing but an empty hole now. He turned to Yan Zhengxiong and declared that he should stay put because he himself was heading out to catch someone. Ouyangze smashed straight through the floors of the building. He turned toward Liu Qingzhu and declared that she couldn't run. But right then, a voice hit his ears, one he knew too well. He pressed himself with the thought that it might be the dragon, though it should have been impossible, since that beast was supposed to chase the other pendant holders. Yet the realization struck him that the dragon's prey had always been those carrying pendants. He convinced himself that with 4 pendants hanging on him, the creature would naturally head to the place stacked with the most. But in his arrogance, he had walked into the danger instead. The dragon's eyes snapped open with the flare of its double pupils. Ouyangze jolted in alarm. The space around him collapsed into smothering darkness. He pressed out a sharp question if this was a domain, if the dragon could wield such a thing too. He explained harshly that the technique dragged one into a sealed space at the instant they locked eyes with the caster, and the only escape was to crush the caster themselves, meaning the dragon had forced him into the trap. It was moving in. He flared out his wings, trying to shield himself from the dragon's vicious slashes. But horror spiked when he caught the dragon's presence at his back, blade ready to cut him down. Meanwhile, Yan Zhengxiong ran straight into Yihe. He lifted his blade and blocked the strike. Yihe barked out what the hell was happening, and if they had just flipped on global chat to taunt them. Chu Zhou broke in, insisting Yihe should hand that one to him because he craved testing his own strength. Yan Zhengxiong fired back, pressing if Yihe already assumed victory, and if he was really that cocky. Chu Zhou unleashed his skill, Ice Vein. Yan Zhengxiong hacked through the frozen bind, his blade shattering the ice clean. He snapped that he wasn't going anywhere. He hurled his blade downward in a crushing arc, and when Chu Zhou blocked, he twisted and whipped the strike sideways in a sharp maneuver. Chu Zhou stiffened with alarm when he caught sight of that. He whipped out his skill, Windsoul severing blade without wasting a breath. He followed it up with man and blade as one, fusing motion with steel. His ice dragon burst into form the instant he raised his sword high. At the same time, Yan Zhengxiong brought forth his tiger as he slashed with his blade. They clashed head-on, trading brutal strikes without giving ground. Off to the side, Yihei lounged with a look of utter boredom while watching the chaos. Out of nowhere, Yan Zhengxiong sensed Ouyang Ze's presence, assuming he was blasting out a distress signal. He instantly leapt back, narrowly slipping away from Chuzhou's slash. He clicked his tongue, remarking that if not for pressing matters, he would have shattered at least 8 bones by now. Yihei suddenly cut in, tossing out whether he was finished with the tough talk and if he had just declared he could leave. Yan Zhengxiong groaned under the strain as Yihei's fist collided against his guard. He got hurled away when Yihei's energy exploded outward. The tornado Yihei whipped up swelled so massive that the towering building shrank into toy-sized silhouettes beneath it. He remarked with a chilling edge that once his killing intent fueled that fan, it far outstripped the power Lan Yusi ever drew from it. He made it clear he still had unfinished business with the faceless freak. He unleashed his move, Nuclear Blast Fist, declaring it to be only the first strike. The tornado's core erupted in a thunderous blast that rattled the air. The dragon's mangled body flailed helplessly before being hurled skyward. Yihei followed up coolly, announcing it as the second strike. He channeled mountain-breaking Fist Black Flash into his next blow. The dragon ricocheted between the buildings, smashing into them like a ragdoll. He groaned in raw pain when his body finally slammed against the last wall. Yihei mocked that he had expected more strength from a dragon, but it turned out he was nothing more than a worm. The dragon vowed through fury that he would kill. Yihei retorted that he already had him pinned. He swung the dragon's own blade, which he had wrested away, and severed the head cleanly. He quipped that he'd taken the dragon pendant as well, so it seemed the game had reached its end. Moments later, Yan Zhengxiong recoiled in horror at the scene. Yihei strolled past him with casual indifference. Liu Qingzhu muttered that he never should have confronted that dragon-masked figure alone, but Chuzhou countered that anyone other than Yihei would have been nothing but dead weight. The truth struck her immediately, and she admitted inwardly that her injuries left her unable to even muster martial skills. If she had interfered, Yihei would only have split his focus shielding her, and if she had just been stronger, she wouldn't be slowing him down. Suddenly, Yihei cut in to press her about that look on her face. He declared he wanted the ox pendant, and bluntly asked if she wanted him to snatch it, to which she yielded. After a beat, Chuzhou suggested they try lining the pendants up in zodiac order, from rat to pig. When nothing happened, he muttered whether he had messed up the sequence. Yan Zhengxiong suddenly cut through with the revelation that the dragon pendant was never meant to be a typical mask foe. It was a hunter crafted specifically to slaughter pendant holders, which meant in a standard clear, the dragon pendant likely wasn't even necessary. With that, he bent down and claimed the dragon pendant from where it had fallen. Liu Qingzhu pressed if it worked, and Yan Zhengxiong pressed further, wondering if it had set off some hidden mechanism. Dark clouds spun wildly through the sky, all pulled tight around a piercing golden light. Yihei urged them to look upward and pressed what that thing even was. The storm churned around a monstrous eye that fixed its gaze directly on them. Yihei cursed under his breath while locking eyes with the abomination above. The force dragged him upward. His body tugged as if caught on invisible chains. His throat tore with a scream. Then, in a sharp snap, he woke. One of the students blurted out if it was the Huadu train and if they had really returned. Another burst with relief that they were still alive. Another shivered, recalling how they were just trapped in that awful city, demanding to know how they were back here. And another muttered that he remembered being slaughtered by some dog-masked freak. Another confirmed it, adding that the dragon had massacred countless of them, and while one asked if the whole ordeal had only been a dream, another pressed how so many could share the exact same dream. Suddenly, the announcement echoed, ordering the students to remain calm, and explaining that they had been temporarily dragged into a magical illusion crafted by the Eye Relic, clarifying it was merely that year's Imperial U freshman trial, so they should relax. The voice then made a special proclamation, declaring that this year's trial top rank belonged to the Ancheng team, Yihei, Chuzhou, and Liu Qingzhu, who had gathered all 12 zodiac pendants, and that Yihei's outstanding display had earned him the grand prize to be granted upon his enrollment. One of the students grumbled, asking who Yihei even was, and insisting he died early so he never saw what happened after, then pressed if Ouyang-zi hadn't won instead. Another scoffed, demanding what on earth Ansheng was, and how kids from the big city had lost to someone from that place, while another confirmed they really had gotten all 12 pendants and swore it was absurd, since he couldn't even defeat a single mask-wearing freak. Another speculated maybe Yihei was some hidden heir from a martial arts clan, while another declared that they had to meet him. Meanwhile, Yihei mulled that it had finally arrived. He calculated that clearing certain conditions granted him 1 draw, then turned to Chuzhou and requested a wet wipe so he could clean his hands properly. There would be no crooked draws this time. The new template unveiled itself. It was the Tier 13 template, Vampire, Rakud, the Zawarudo. The Huadu Express kept rolling steadily along the tracks like nothing could slow it down. Yihei figured that the Vampire template had to be an SR tier pull, mostly because even if the Bloodline stats looked kind of mid, its evolution form could literally freeze time. And that ability just screamed broken. Out of nowhere, Ouyang-zi pressed him, wanting to know if he really was Yihei and if he had been the one who crushed Qianlong, while Yan Dengxiong wrestled with himself, reminding his nerves that he'd better stay calm because picking a fight with Yihei right now would be dumb, especially since this train didn't even have a hospital on board. Yihei corrected with a flat punch of truth, making it clear that he hadn't just beaten Qianlong, he had ended him. Ouyang-zi flinched hard when that landed in his ears. Then Ouyang-zi rolled straight into pitching his idea, revealing he wanted to form a new student society at Huadu, something separate from the student council, and he wanted Yihei in it, promising him the top seat as president, especially since at that time, the freshman ranking and council were locked tight by the local Huadu crowd. But Ouyang-zi stressed that with Yihei's strength, he finally had a reason to hope that the suffocating Huadu tradition could actually be shattered, so he pressed him to join. Students all around murmured in shock. One pointed out that the untouchable Ouyang-zi was personally inviting Yihei. Another blurted that he was offering to hand him the president spot, while another marveled that this could spark the birth of a legendary group at Huadu, a straight-up historic moment unfolding before them. But Yihei cut it short with an apology, making it clear he wasn't interested in turf fights against the student council or messing with factions because flying solo was just more his style. One student gawked that Yihei had actually turned him down and muttered how unbelievable that was. Another dubbed it a historic rejection. Another demanded to know who could he be to flat-out reject Ouyang-zi, and someone else just sighed that it was a shame. Ouyang-zi brushed it off, remarking that it was fine, calling it his card on the table and leaving the door open for future collaboration. The sky shifted a few beats later, and the sun started sinking low. Chuzhou piped up, pointing out that they had finally arrived. Yihei took it in with wide-eyed awe. He muttered that this was Huadu, and no doubt, it was a major city. The train slowed, and moments later, the students poured out. The train attendant raised their voice, addressing all freshmen, directing them firmly to follow the tunnel leading toward Huadu University. The students moved along just like they were told. When they spilled out at the end of the tunnel, they all froze in shock. An enormous aircraft stood waiting for them, hulking and impossible to miss. The announcement system crackled, reminding every student to board in order and stick to the same seat number they had back on the Huadu Express. Suddenly, Yihei reached out and poked Lu Qingzhu from behind, calling her name, and she froze on the spot. Her mind snapped back instantly to Qianlong's warning that even though they might be technically engaged, marriage hadn't happened yet, so she had no business acting too close in public, and under no circumstances should she let that guy take advantage. She had to protect herself. She turned on him, demanding to know what he was doing and reminding him that everyone was staring, but he just shot back, asking what exactly they were staring at, teasing that she must still be half asleep. He pressed her to answer, pestering why they were suddenly taking a plane. She fumed, wondering how her mother could have locked her into an engagement with someone like him. Then, she gave the answer, pointing out that Huadu wasn't on the ground at all, because Huadu was the Sky City. A few moments later, the aircraft cut through the sky and drifted above the cloud cover where Huadu University stood proudly, like a fortress in the heavens. A narrow section of the shimmering barrier shielding the campus powered down just enough for the aircraft to slip inside like it belonged there. Yihei figured the heavy-duty electromagnetic grid was designed to keep magical beasts from barging in, especially since even his life field sensing range got dulled inside, which was exactly the kind of defense he expected from Huadu. When they stepped off the plane, the attendant motioned for them to line up and collect their student ID cards. Yihei grabbed his card without fuss. Right after, the announcement blared across the hall, instructing everyone to head toward the maglev station to transfer to their dorms. A short ride later, the group rolled up to the towering dormitory building. Yihei remarked that they had officially reached the world's highest city, which drew confused muttering from one student wondering what he was on about, while another sneered that the guy sounded like a dumbass who'd fried his brain. Inside the elevator, Yihei mentioned he was assigned to the 42nd floor, room A3, and pressed Chuzhou about his placement. Chuzhou answered that he was on the 45th floor, room B7. So Yihei teased that since Chu was higher, he'd be the last to get off. When Yihei reached his room, he marveled aloud if it was seriously a 100-square-meter private suite and muttered that Huadu really spoiled its students. The setup came with the latest PC model, a full package that looked like the university thought of everything. He chuckled and tossed out the rhetorical question of how anyone could say no to a personal massage tub. He muttered that the place basically screamed five-star hotel. Then his tone sharpened as he reminded himself it was time to focus and max out the Rakud vampire template. On the maglev ride, he experimented with the student ID, realizing he had to scan its barcode with his phone to log into Huadu's exclusive Huadu Pass app, which linked straight to the University City Mall where purchases only ran on study points, their unique digital currency. He immediately liquidated the last 30-plus million summer coins from his bank account and funneled it all into study points. Out of nowhere, the app buzzed with a notification confirming Huadu Pass activation, crediting him with 322.43 study points. He scoffed at the brutal conversion rate of 100,000 summer coins per study point, calling it insane, but admitted the gear inside the Unimall was no joke, packed with exclusive items hidden from the open market, one of Huadu's perks few ever spoke about. He filtered his options down to blood-related magic cores only, muttering whether that would be enough to fully max out Rakud, then remarked that even his massive pseudo-human template hadn't blown past 10 million to hit over 90% sync. A few moments later, a drone zipped over, thanking Yihei for his purchase and wishing him good luck with training, politely nudging him to rate their service 5 stars, and he muttered it was fast as hell, plus drone delivery to top it off. He decided right there he'd consume all of them in one shot. A few moments later, he groaned that he'd gone too hard too fast, and his body was freaking out under the surge. He pushed his sync to a clean 100% with the Rakud template in a rush. He muttered that the payoff was insane, even his fangs sharpened to lethal points. A blood gauge visibly etched itself along his back, making it clear that once he sank his teeth into someone, draining them would be as casual as sipping bubble tea. His fingernails elongated into claw-like blades too. Then, like a sudden spark, he got a wild idea. He drove those fresh claws into his own throat. Yihei hunched over his bathroom sink, groaning in raw pain. Blood gushed out of his mouth and throat like a broken faucet, messy and relentless. Then, without warning, the wound knitted itself shut in a flash. He remarked that the speed felt a little faster than the last time. The vampire's regeneration looked solid enough, but the physical tweaks weren't the prize here. What really mattered was the new power, Sa Warudo. A few beats later, he remarked that, true to a world obsessed with martial strength, even the dorms came stocked with training rooms. He shut his eyes tight and unleashed a surge of vampire energy. He opened them again with a sharp glint. Rakud now stood in front of him. He urged Rakud to go ahead and smash him with everything he had. Rakud unfurled his wings with grim weight. His cape whipped violently through the air. From that storm, Za Warudo came forth. Rakud hurled a punch at Yihei without hesitation. Yihei lifted his arm up to block the strike. Za Warudo's blow hit so brutally that its energy tore past the guard and burst out of Yihei's body. The bones in Yihei's hands shattered into fragments. The force launched him through the air until he slammed against the wall. He admitted it was flawless, primal, and wild, and then pressed that they should test the time stop next. He triggered his skill. Instant pause, Za Warudo. 2 seconds slipped by, and the barrier he set up held steady. At 4 seconds, the barrier quivered under pressure. At 5 seconds, cracks spread across it. He wondered aloud if 5 seconds marked the real cap, but then he rejected that and pushed himself to keep going, refusing to stop time. At 5.3 seconds, blood seeped from his eyes while his body shook in agony. At 5.6 seconds, his vision blurred into haze. At 5.8 seconds, the barrier shattered completely into nothing. He declared that, just as he figured the original host's limit capped at 5 seconds, but that was never his limit. The next morning, Yihei and Chuzhou strolled together toward the gymnasium. Yihei remarked that the sunlight felt a bit sharp that day, and when Chuzhou pressed him if it really was, he admitted with a nod, a little, all while grumbling inwardly that ever since he fused with the vampire template, the sun had become annoying, though not lethal enough to scorch him alive. Chuzhou then brought up whether he had seen the university's academic reform plan that year, and when Yihei dismissed it with a no and pushed back with why, he groused that he spent the whole night grappling with Zawarudo and had no mind left for anything else. Chuzhou explained that in all the small group mentorships, each student locked onto a primary mentor for the year, and if they wanted, they could scoop up assistant mentors on the side. Yihei wondered aloud if they were going mentor hunting, and Chuzhou shot back that they weren't, because he had to while Yihei didn't. He pointed out that Yihei should check the new student group chat and scroll the announcement from last night, where the university bragged that thanks to him collecting all the zodiac pendants, he had earned the right to pick any mentor freely. The chosen one couldn't refuse, even if they wanted, and Yihei muttered that blasting it out publicly like that felt a bit too flashy. A few moments later, they rolled up to the gymnasium. Yihei observed that it was jammed with people, and Chuzhou noted that it looked like 3 per round for the test, with the mentors flicking on the lights to signal their picks. Yihei urged him to go ahead, claiming he would drift around since he could snag any mentor he pleased. So timing didn't matter. Picking a mentor just felt boring. Suddenly, he caught the trace of a scent. He muttered that it was the smell of blood. If it had been normal blood, he wouldn't have flinched, but this blood carried something darker, hidden yet brutal, boiling like a lethal undertow beneath still water. Steeped in killing intent and sin, it stirred the baleful aura inside him, driving him to hunt down the source. He then stiffened in surprise when he spotted where it came from. He saw Gong Kei, calmly savoring her sweet potato. Yihei wondered if that tiny little girl could really be the one radiating that spine-crushing aura, and he figured he must have completely misread the situation. Gong Kei caught sight of him next. She casually called him a kid and pressed if he had been practicing flesh-binding demon prison. He demanded how she even knew that while grumbling inside that she looked like a grade schooler, yet carried herself like some cranky elder. And just as he tried to process being labeled kid, she tossed out that it was obvious, because she had personally helped Xiaohu refine that martial art. He kept turning over in his head who Xiaohu could be, and Lu Chenghu bluntly confirmed that yes, that name was his. Gong Kei went on to declare that Liu Chenghu had been her disciple roughly 90 years ago. But Yihei snapped back if she was screwing with him because sure, martial artists lived far beyond normal folk, and grandmasters might still swing strong in their 80s or 90s, yet he demanded what was with her, looking like some preteen brat. He reasoned that for freakish martial art users, compressing their skeleton into a childlike frame wasn't off the table, but staring at that white-haired little lowly, whether people branded it innocent or flat-out clueless, there was no chance in hell that level of purity was fake because not even an Oscar-winning act could sell it that perfectly. Gong Kei then pushed him, asking if he doubted her. He barked that he'd sooner buy himself as Emperor Qin Shi Huang. In a blink, his surroundings twisted, and suddenly his head sat locked inside a guillotine. The blade dropped, and he was instantly decapitated. His severed head thrashed as it sank in a rising pool of his own blood. He roared out if this was some illusion and admitted the killing intent was so raw it made him actually hallucinate being executed. He was just about to summon Zawarudo, but Gong Kei abruptly shoved a strawberry gummy at him, cheerfully stating it was her favorite flavor. She sheepishly apologized, muttering she had probably gone overboard, then begged him not to tattle to the school since she only scored 1 or 2 hours of outdoor freedom each week. So she was honestly miserable. He demanded to know who she even was. She introduced herself and boasted she was a frighteningly powerful grandmaster, tossing in that just between them when Huadu University's president, Shi Jingwen, was a little brat. She once made him bawl. He instantly dropped to his knees on the ground. He reasoned that if Gong Kei had really refined the Xuanhuang martial art, then she could help him smash through his bottleneck because she was a slaughter-type grandmaster, which lined up with him perfectly, so it was the obvious path. He declared that he had roamed for years without finding a teacher worth kneeling to, so he yearned to be her disciple, and he begged her to accept him. She froze, clearly caught off guard. Meanwhile, the other mentors were still stationed at the gymnasium. One student exclaimed that they couldn't believe the deans of all 5 Wadu University academies were acting as new student mentors that year. And another chimed in that even becoming the disciple of one of them would guarantee a future carved in gold. But another scoffed that they were delusional because the 5 deans had no reason to waste their time on nobodies like them. Another pressed what they were even hanging around for, and if this was just sightseeing, and another scoffed back that of course not, rattling that if they hadn't heard the news yet, freshman Yihei had cleared the Zodiac trial. So obviously the dean showed up because of him. What none of the new students had a clue about was how the Zodiac trial got streamed live. And the ones glued to that feed were every single teacher at Huadu University, because ever since that kickoff broadcast on the train, the faculty had been tracking how each rookie reacted when a sudden crisis hit. With AI crunching micro-expressions and tiny reaction tails, every student's moves were tallied into scores, and the ones who barged into Zodiac City like idiots without preparation got slapped with garbage grades. Inside the trial, combat smarts, real technique in the field, and how well teams meshed in clashes with the Zodiac masks all counted as hard metrics. So even a kid who never scored a kill could rack up high marks if they shined in any one slot. Yihei ended up the only student pulling perfect marks across the whole board. But even that normally wouldn't drag the deans out, and what actually blew them off their seats was how Yihei went and killed a boss never meant to be fought at all. The supposed untouchable, guaranteed death boss, Chenlong. One dean remarked that Yihei might not even have clocked who Chenlong really was, since he turned out to be a battle model crafted by Nuwa, the national-grade supercomputer that got trained using legacy data from Fu Hongsheng, the national-level martial artist who had entered Huadu University long ago. Even if not all of Fu Hongsheng's terrifying abilities, like his divine tier God Eyes, could be fully cloned inside that Mirage realm, the bottom line was clear. He remained the strongest martial artist ever born in Xia country, maybe the world, and his university records had stayed untouched for a full century. For Yihei to cut down even a rough model of him, imperfect or not, already screamed monstrous talent, and unless some disaster wrecked his path, he was a lock for Grandmaster and maybe even Archmaster one day. So the deans figured they should just hold back and wait for him to pick his own mentor. Out of nowhere, a teacher broke in toward the deans with a heavy tone, reporting that there was some bad news. Yihei had just gone and declared he wanted to be the disciple of Gong Kei, the ex-Imperial University professor who now carried the title of Special Personnel. Meanwhile, Yihei lingered out on the open grounds alongside Gong Kei. She probed him on whether he really wanted her as his teacher, and he answered firm that it was right. His mind set, while mulling that if he remembered right, she was technically over 100 years old, because otherwise he was basically begging to serve 3 years minimum for kneeling to a loli in broad daylight. She admitted that she figured she had been kicked out of Imperial University. He pressed her on whether she hadn't once mentioned being restricted to only 1 or 2 hours outside each week, and he declared that if she took him in, he could work a way to restore her freedom in 2 years flat. She gave in with a curt fine, accepted him, and he smirked inwardly that he had snagged her. Then the deans abruptly cut in that they needed to hold up a second. All 5 of them materialized straight out of thin air. Gong Kei clicked her tongue with a sharp sound and muttered that the busybodies had arrived. One of them greeted her as senior, and pressed that she had agreed there'd be no contact with students during her release hours, stressing that her current headspace made her unfit to mentor. And another backed it with a firm echo that she should head home right away. She tossed out a casual all right, and turned to Yihei to ask his name, which he handed to her. She noted it as good and told Yihei to come home with her. Yihei trailed after Gong Kei into the Huadu Research Institute, curiosity flicking in his eyes as he scanned every corner while keeping to her heels. He kept glancing about only to jolt when she moved with calm confidence and swung open what was clearly a hidden door. He pressed her on whether she really lived in such a remote place, and she confirmed it, adding with unnerving casualness that for decades she had a bad streak of hurting people. So Huadu tucked her under the institute, though in recent years she managed to keep herself in check and now enjoyed occasional freedom. He prodded her on whether he was the first student she had taken in all that time. And while remarking that he had a strange way of looking at things, she turned the question back, demanding if he shouldn't actually be afraid. He came back with a jab, tossing out if he ought to fear she might chop him to pieces. The elevator jolted to a halt on floor negative 666. He frowned at how the hallway of such a massive institute could be so cramped, and she dryly pointed out that the passage was built for her alone. He noticed a number glowing on the heavy door and pressed her about what the countdown meant. She cut him short, saying there was no time to waste, and shoved him to get inside. But he still pressed her on what that ticking clock was about. She explained that every trip out starts the timer, and if she fails to return before it hits 0, the alarm fires straight to the Wadu headmaster, marking her as a fugitive of the university, which made him push back in disbelief if things were really that harsh. Both of them slipped into the chamber at the very last second. The counter struck 0. The ironclad doors clashed together with a deafening slam as they sealed the space. She remarked with cool relief that they had made it. Meanwhile, Yi-hei mulled over how a strange magnetic field clogged the place, disrupting her martial energy and keeping it from forming outside his body, leaving any martial technique sluggish and weak here. Gong Kei bluntly called it her confinement cell. Shi Jingwen and his little circle, wary of her breaking loose, had crafted her a colossal 3-level house. It came packed with entertainment, training grounds, every amenity, yet buried under thick magnetic suppressors to cripple martial energy should she try to claw her way out. He kept thinking she named it a cell, but it felt more like a gilded suite. Luxury stocked, comfort stacked. It looked closer to a shrine than a prison. At Huadu University, Shi Jingwen sat rooted in his office. One of the teachers approached and reported grimly that Yi-hei had just accepted Gong Kei as his master, but Shi Jingwen waved it aside and reminded him that Huadu's mission wasn't to churn out average talent. It was to cultivate a singular figure who could bear the weight of Xia's future and humanity's survival. When a rare genius surfaced, their role was to give full support and freedom to grow. So Yi-hei should stay with Gong Kei for now, especially with the freshman training camp drawing to its close, since he would become the whetstone to hone the young blades. And the teacher responded with steady acknowledgement that he understood. Suddenly, a staff member from the institute turned to Shi Jingwen and reported with a flat edge that Yi-hei had stepped into the confinement zone with Gong Kei, and for the moment, things still looked steady. However, predictive analytics laid out the grim forecast. The special-ranked Gong Kei carried a risk of spiraling out of control above 5 if shut in with someone for long stretches, while Yi-hei bore an 89.7% likelihood of failing to last until rescue, and even in the slim chance of rescue, a brutal 95.3% likelihood of not surviving afterward. Shi Jingwen remarked that these so-called special-class combatants were either death row monsters brimming with raw strength, or martial artists crushed under powers twisted by special circumstance. Their freedom got muzzled during peacetime, but when Xia staggered into genuine crisis, they got unleashed at the front lines like national-level weapons. And staring down someone like that, Yi-hei needed the mindset of a man already prepared to die, because without carrying that readiness, there was no way he could walk the blood-soaked path. Xia was running thin on time, while the idiots of the Northern Biton Federation and those fanatical lunatics of the Divine Descent Nation, busy worshipping secret realm technology, were stirring up more restlessness by the day. That new generation needed to climb fast. Meanwhile, at the confinement room, B 3-level training hall, Gong Kei remarked almost offhand that it had been decades since she last taught anyone, so they might as well start with a spar to see where Yi-hei stood. And Yi-hei pressed if she intended to suppress her cultivation down to the martial stage for that spar. She admitted with a casual laugh that he was right. She had forgotten and flipped the switch. He announced he was ready. Yet he bristled inside, reminding himself that he had no desire to taste that guillotine illusion again. Gong Kei lunged at him instantly, eyes gleaming with menace. He wondered in alarm if she was aiming straight for his vitals and what happened to the supposed friendly spar. He ran the math, thinking he had at least 5 dodge routes, but each time she struck before he could shift, reading his body as if it were an open manual. There sat only one option: take it head on. He swung his fist, throwing everything into a counterattack. She probed whether he was trying to layer his bloodline awakening to pump his speed, guard himself, and strike back in one stroke. She remarked it was a pity because she moved even faster than him. She twisted his arms behind him and drove a sharp kick into his back. His complexion drained, and he screamed from the stabbing pain. Gong Kei leapt back from Yi-hei. eyeing the arm that gushed blood like a broken fountain. He remarked with a grimace that she really didn't hold back, since even his bloodline awakening got smacked back to its base state. She admitted with a dark sort of relish that it had been ages since she last tasted blood. He confessed that he couldn't keep up with her in hand-to-hand at all, so he planned to whip out some unfair martial arts, and he urged her to guide him along the way. He triggered his mega-humanoid template. He noted with relief that grinding all night to max it out turned out to be the smartest move he could have made. Meanwhile, Gong Ke considered that for someone still stuck in the martial disciple stage, that technique's raw power felt unreal. And as she wondered if she had just taken in some monster disguised as a disciple, she declared that the master had better get serious in that case. She carved a deadly slash into existence with nothing but her bare hand. It slammed into the mega-humanoid's skull. The collision erupted in an explosion. Yehei countered with the ancestral humanoid split form, armor plate humanoid. Gong Ke flinched at his abrupt transformation. Then she pulled her arm back, primed for retaliation. She inhaled deep, steadying herself. She unleashed her spiral smash fist. The armor plating on the humanoid's arm shredded apart like it was tissue. Yehei recognized with dread that based on the Imperial Demora exosuit, the armor plate humanoid body was flesh-forged armor with defense dozens of times sturdier than the mega-humanoid, and she tore through it like it was paper. His eyes went wide, alarm flooding them. She pressed him, with a sharp edge in her voice, wondering if he was hiding inside the giant's mouth. And he realized in horror that her perception was monstrous, since he had shut down every single vital sign, yet she still nailed him. She commanded her disciple to crawl on out. He responded with split form, meteor humanoid, Xuanlin hornspike. The blow drove her back, and her feet screeched across the floor as she skidded. He threw out the challenge that since her slashes were insane, he might as well see if she could handle being cut right back. He added that while she might shrug off the melting effect of his nuclear breath, he pressed her on how she planned to block that. Suddenly, a massive spiky chain materialized. More chains surged in, locking Yehei tight. He muttered with resignation that it was this cursed place again, and he figured he could never escape the guillotine. The executioner's blade dropped to sever his head. He shouted for Zawarudo. He acknowledged bitterly that he had pushed his master too far, and she had dragged him into her killing intent domain again, meaning none of this was reality. It was a mental illusion carved out of her bloodlust, and he had to break out with raw willpower. Zawarudo hammered the space with a storm of fists. Each punch cracked the illusion's shell. The whole space splintered and shattered. Back in reality, Yehei's eyes snapped open. Gong Ke checked if he was awake and remarked that the turtle shell he wore was ridiculously hard. He realized grimly that she must have ripped him straight out of his humanoid form by brute force, shattering the hardened shell he had crystallized around his true body like it was glass. That level of power definitely should have been impossible for a martial disciple. He demanded if she had cheated. She retorted that she beat him fair and square, tossing the question of what cheating even was. He pressed again, if it was real, and she admitted sheepishly that maybe she poured in a bit more strength than intended, because he knew his master was absurdly strong, and sometimes she misjudged her own power on the opening strikes. He stared at her, doubt written clear across his features. She looked uneasy, guilt flickering across her face. She promised she wouldn't cheat next round, and pleaded with him not to storm off because it had been decades since she had anyone to mess around with. Yehei and Gong Ke were still hanging around the training room, the air heavy with leftover tension. He told her bluntly to quit the waterworks already. She pressed him on whether he planned on taking off. He declared that after working himself raw to earn the spot as her disciple, walking away would make no sense at all. She cleared her throat fast, insisting she hadn't been crying in the first place, and he privately admitted that the excuse was a neat little recovery. After a short pause, she remarked that he had already gotten a sharp grasp of his strength. Still nowhere near her level, sure, but compared to most folks, he was clearly gifted. So they might as well start training, and she pressed him on what he wanted to learn. He answered that he craved advanced martial techniques and wanted the secret behind how she sliced lightning and lopped off his humanoid's arm. She confirmed he meant the slashing and admitted it was tough to pass on, since the knack came only after cutting through enough things, which drove him to press what kind of feel she meant. She revealed it was all about the line. No matter if it was a body, a magical beast, or some random object, there always existed that exact entry point, a line that begged to be cleanly cut through, something he could think of as the kill line. He reflected that her style came off totally unlike Qianlong's, who also specialized in slashes. Qianlong's slash hammered with brute force and cutting sharpness. Her slash carried the cold precision of a butcher's blade, crisp and flawless in technique. She told him flat that if he wanted to grasp that, it could be done. But she advised starting by becoming a martial artist first, since without that foundation, he wasn't even fit to handle most of her methods. She then tossed the question back at him, asking if he understood the difference between a martial disciple and a martial artist, and he pushed her to explain. She explained that it wasn't just physical growth, but mental evolution, and the real edge martial artists held over disciples was the vital ability of inner vision. Through it, a martial artist shifted from broad cultivation into fine-tuned refinement, literally able to see their meridians, pressure points, and organs, then drive martial energy to harden them and expand the body's limits. So in short, spirit had to stand strong first, only then would the body follow. He realized he hadn't expected her to be such a sharp and effective teacher, and no wonder she held a chair at the Imperial University, because even if she carried that streak of madness, her depth of knowledge hadn't dulled one bit. And with that in mind, ever since fusing with the vampire template and awakening Za Warudo, he had felt a clean surge in his mental stats, which would hand him a massive edge once he stepped into the martial artist stage. He pressed her on what the difference in advancement methods looked like when he hit that level. She explained that advancement techniques and martial skills got ranked across 4 tiers: Tiangang, Disha, Xuanhuang, and unranked. Normally, students from vocational colleges or lower-tier schools only touched unranked advancement techniques. The upside there was that they were simple to handle, and anyone with enough blood energy and martial strength could crash through, which was why over 80% of martial artists advanced with unranked methods. But students at Wadu University started at minimum with Xuanhuang tier methods. He followed up about Tiangang and Disha tiers. She clarified that Tiangang tier skills were basically sacred relics, most salvaged from hidden realms or ancient ruins, and there might not even be 10 surviving in the world. Even Imperial University itself owned just 1, and with his current rank and clearance, there was no chance he would ever get near it. But he did qualify to study the Disha tier advancement technique. The Killer's Bodhi Heart Sutra stood as the Disha level technique she had personally mastered. Zhao Hu's flesh-bound demon cage had actually been born from that very method. Yi had declared he wanted to learn it. She approved and remarked that they should begin right away, telling him to brace for the killing intent domain she had shaped precisely for that purpose. He cut in with a weight and demanded if it was that again. He jolted when he spotted how much blood stained his feet. She chuckled and confessed she just adored the smell of blood. A few hours dragged by, and evening settled in. Class wrapped up, and Chuzhou strode out alongside the other students. Out of nowhere, he caught Yihe moving up ahead. He called out to him and questioned how his first day had gone, but then he stiffened as an ominous force pricked at him and a huge sword materialized, looming behind him. He instantly drew his blade and braced for combat. Yihe was radiating that dark, ominous energy, but once recognition landed, he relented and admitted it was just a reflex. Chuzhou froze, shaken and wordless as he stared at him. He demanded what the hell he had gone through that day. 10 hours earlier, Yihe hung inside the illusion realm, trapped in that setup Gonke arranged. Gonke laid it out that he wasn't allowed to pull on martial skills or flashy powers, just the plain blade in his grip against the horde of zombies. He pressed her, asking if she really expected him to face that swarm with nothing but a dull knife. She shot back that the whole point was drilling his body into remembering the raw sensation, the tearing drag of skin slicing, the jarring grind of bone splitting, drilling muscle memory until he could hit the kill line on reflex and cut clean with speed and accuracy. He declared that he already understood enough and moved straight to going at it. He whipped the knife around and shredded through the zombies crowding him. She muttered to herself that running her Disha tier technique in an illusion carried real danger, and plenty of martial disciples weren't even fit to attempt such a thing. If his mental stats hadn't been abnormally sharp, the suffocating killing intent would have crushed him. So no wonder Shi Jingwen had thrown him the title of Rising Star of Huadu, and she honestly felt a spark of anticipation about where his future would go. Back in the present, Yihe slumped inside his dorm room. He remarked that it had only been 1 day, and he already felt dead tired, which made sense since this was supposed to be the best university in Xia. Suddenly, he mentioned that he might as well check who was online. Liu Qingzhu lounged in her dorm apartment. And when he reached out to her with a casual question, she answered that her mom had just delivered what he wanted, and it was right there with her. She also thanked him, explaining that thanks to him, she managed to clinch first place in the freshman trial team. He pressed if that was really the case and replied that he'd swing by her place to pick it up soon, but she countered that there was no need for him to bother since she would drone it over to him. He agreed easily and then asked if she was right about meeting her mentor that day and who exactly she got. She revealed that it was Dean Bai, saying the dean recognized her potential and took her as a student. And while he acknowledged it was great news and good for her, she flipped it back on him, asking who had taken him as a mentor. He figured it was better not to drop the fact that he had flat out rejected 5 deans in a row since that would rob her of sleep. So just as he was about to let slip who picked him up, he shoved his mouth underwater. And when she pressed him on what he said, he deliberately stayed submerged. Half a semester later, the first term was crawling toward its finale, and for the wide-eyed freshmen at Wadu University, the ride had been loud, messy, and impossible to forget. For example, right at the kickoff, Ouyang pulled together elites from all over the provinces and slapped a flashy name on them, the Dragon Blood Society, and they swaggered into influence among the first years. No shock at all, when the Wadu students dragged themselves back from the summer training camp, they butted heads straight into Dragonblood. As tempers ran hotter, duels kept sparking between Dragonblood's hotshots and the local crew, and the truth was they dropped more matches than they snatched, so their blaze of momentum fizzled into a weak flicker. At that point, the freshman with the biggest spotlight was Zhang Jianhui, or more accurately, he might have been the one-name freshman nationwide all knew, because he had strutted in as the #1 scorer in the Huadu entrance exam. During the live stream of that test, his power cracked the audience into stunned silence, and rumors whispered that Fu Hongsheng himself had tagged him as a future national-grade warrior. Meanwhile, Yihe, who had once hogged the spotlight right at the start, had slipped into ghost status since no one had seen him for over 3 months. Back then, he was still holed up inside the Huadu Research Institute, and Gongke told him bluntly to push harder. Every single step she pressed down funneled refined martial energy into him, energy she had carved and honed herself. That energy carried the flavor of her killer's Bodhi-sutra insights, locking in his fresh martial artist stage breakthrough, and he even got the shameless perk of brushing against her delicate little feet. She teased him, tossing out whether he felt lucky, while he gritted through the thought that her sealed martial energy made every push-up crush him like a mountain, her power wriggling through him in such a ticklish torment it nearly drove him crazy. She mocked him about being a scrub, snapping if he was already worn out, pointing out he hadn't even scratched 1,000 yet. He barked back, demanding who she was calling a scrub, and fired up his pace with reckless heat. She pressed harder, taunting that he better crank it faster. He roared as his body trembled, smashing himself against his limit. When the counter hit 1,000 push-ups, his body detonated in a violent surge, and she hopped clear without hesitation. Yihe's muscles were tearing apart in plain sight. He admitted through the shock that the eruption of bloody energy ripped apart his old, tired flesh. In its place, fresh muscle stacked itself up, buzzing with raw martial force. She shrieked and cursed that his shirt had vanished and called him a perv. But he shot back that if she was going to cover her eyes, she ought to shut those fingers too and quit peeking. It was the cue to wrap that retreat, and when she prodded if he was really heading out, he answered without pause that of course he was, since 3 months locked in with her left him desperate to touch the sun again. She pushed further, asking if he would come back. He fired off that obviously he would, and she sucked at video games anyway, so she better grind some practice before he returned. But she just stuck her tongue out and sneered about who even invited him to play in the first place. Moments later, Yihe muttered that it had been 3 whole months since sunlight hit him, and even if he wasn't in love with the glow anymore, he still longed for it. The stretch felt like a whole lifetime, but he didn't crawl out of retreat just to stroll lazily around. He had business lined up. At Wadu, grades weren't just paper scores, but carried a heavy chunk of off-campus missions, tracking martial fugitives, poking into secret realms, throwing down against beast tides, or even tangling with criminal rings and foreign foes. His first pit stop was the Student Activity Center to snag a mission, and while at it, he'd catch up with an old buddy. Walking through the doors of the center, he remarked that it had been ages since he laid eyes on Chuzhou. Chuzhou shot back that he had finally crawled out of retreat and grumbled that he sure made him wait long enough. Yihe pressed Chuzhou on how the power-up was going, and Chuzhou admitted with a casual edge that he broke through to martial artists 2 months back. Chuzhou reflected that it was his first time laying eyes on Yihe in 3 months, and while Yihe's aura and frame looked unchanged, that lack of shift was the creepiest detail of all, making him mull over how far his strength had grown and if he could really square up to Xiang Jianhui. He recalled how 3 days earlier, he got an invite to watch a so-called private ring match between Huadu freshman rep Xiang Jianhui and Dragonblood Society Vice Chair Wu Yangzi. As expected, Wu Yangzi got dismantled in 10 minutes, and from the rhythm of the fight, Xiang Jianhui hadn't even pushed himself, which made him weigh whether Yihe could take him. But then he figured that maybe by now, Xiang Jianhui wasn't even on Yihe's level. Out of nowhere, Liu Qingzhu cut in, requesting pardon for the delay. She admitted she was late. Yihe addressed her directly, prodding on what she planned to do next. She recalled Xinlan once telling her that since she and Yihe were already a couple, they should act like it on campus. So she pushed back on whether they really had to do that at this moment. But Yihe shot back, grilling her on how she could go 3 months without seeing him, and not even bother to greet him. She flared that she hated him so much. A little while later, they all walked into the building. Chuzhou pointed out that the big screen was cycling through the latest hot missions and standout completions. He and Liu Qingzhu had already cleared their quotas, even overshooting them, and mentioned they only came today, just to team up with him. Liu Qingzhu pointed out that the 3 most fitting missions for them now were Hengcheng's serial killer, Liangsheng's beast-tide anomaly, and Lingshui County's abnormality. And though all 3 were Tier 2 at first, Lingshui had just been bumped to Tier 3. Huadu's off-campus missions ranged from Tier 1 to 5, the danger scaling upward, with first years usually sticking to Tier 1, and the only Tier 2 she had touched was a 10-person team-up, so a 3-person first-year squad barely ever got approval for Tier 2. Yihe brushed it off, saying it was fine since he carried a privilege card, recalling Gongke once remarking that he could already hold his ground, with only a handful of first and second years able to even trade blows with him. So what he needed were tougher missions to grind sharper, and with that card he could take on any tier. Though grabbing Tier 4 or 5 at random was foolish, since even Xuanwu-class warriors sometimes went down there. Liu Qingzhu pressed him on where the privilege card came from, and seeing Yihe's nerves, Chuzhou cut in smoothly, asking Yihe what he thought of the 3 options. Yihe remarked that risk and reward always walked side by side, silently thankful Chuzhou had shifted the talk, and he explained that the first mission was a straight manhunt, which meant awful efficiency since CID had hunted for months with nothing to show, making the real grind in tracking, not killing. The second was auxiliary investigation, and with Great Xia Dragonfinch already deployed, they'd be stuck with scraps, no frontline battle or intel work for them. And the third was full process in their own hands with no safety net and massive unknowns. But the bigger the danger, the bigger the payout. If they got scared of risk and lived like greenhouse flowers, then there was no point in being martial artists, so he leaned toward the third, which Liu Qingzhu backed, and when Chuzhou declared himself in, Yihe closed it off by saying good, and that they'd head out that same day. At the reception, the receptionist scoffed that it was nonsense, and while she grilled them on whether they hadn't watched a second-year squad already get wiped in Lingshui, she jabbed that they were 3 clueless first-years daring to take a Tier 3 and clearly overestimating themselves. Yihe flashed that he had a privilege card, but she cut in sharp, pressing if he had picked up lying and snapping, that she would call the director and expose him right away. She barked toward the director and confirmed with a sharp yes. She instantly switched face and wished them a victorious fortune, and Yihe dryly remarked that he still liked her harsh bite better. Moments later, Yihe declared that the 2 of them should prep their gear. While he swung by to pick something up, Yihe headed straight for the College of Mech and Magitech Foundry. His identity cleared the check at the entrance. He greeted the dean and announced that he came to claim his weapon, the first-place prize from the Pendant War. And the dean remarked that he skipped a Disha tier skill to gamble on a weapon. So his eye was sharp, though a pity that Gongke had beaten him there first. But enough chatter. The dean urged him to behold the piece he forged. Lacking elemental attributes, yet channeling martial energy at 95% efficiency, hammered from the ultra-tough special alloy Starfall Gold, a top-grade divine blade. That horse cutter stretched about 1.2 meters long with a broad, flat build. its dusky edge flecked with starlight, the clear sign of starfall gold. The spine bore dense sun and moon serrations weighted for brutal impact, so each swing smashed down with dreadful force. The grip came bound in anti-slip black leather, woven with metal filaments, also starfall gold, built to ease chi infusion. Every slash carried a shriek of wind and a flash of light, enough to freeze blood. Yihei muttered that it worked out fine, since the heft sat just right. No float, fit his grip well, and kind of amusing that it had been tailored to his old stats 3 months back, yet still synced with his power after the martial artist breakthrough. What he could only admit was Imperial Yu's bladesmiths truly had chops, and the dean boasted that of course he'd dare claim Gonke herself would call him dad when it came to forging, and when Yihei addressed him again, he coughed and warned that he'd better not mouth that line to Gonke. A little later, Yihei regrouped with the others and headed to Lingshui County. Chuzhou remarked that to keep the mission under wraps, they'd pose as ordinary university students on internship. Yihei figured first move should be a sweep with life field sensing, and since he'd pushed the Demora template to 71% that half-term, his coverage could blanket the entire county, though he fretted their arrival might spook the rats in the gutter, and once they scattered, the real headache wasn't killing, but hunting them down. Chuzhou pressed that they should just come along and check out the house Imperial Yu had lined up for them. All of a sudden, Liu Gensheng rolled up and called out if they wanted a ride, pointing out tricycles were cheap and fast. Yihei remarked that the mission was already underway. Liu Gensheng remarked that Yihei looks like a decent sort, and pressed him on which school he belonged to, and whether he was on holiday for a bit of sightseeing, to which Yihei replied that he came from Lingshui County, dragged 2 classmates over for some fun, and studied in Yuncheng at the moment. Liu Gensheng pressed further, wanting to know if he truly came from Lingshui County, and who his family was since he didn't recall spotting him before. Yihei explained that his grandfather's name had been Yi Shurong, who passed away years ago, and after that he moved away, and when Liu Gensheng recognized Yi Shurong, Yihei figured it was lucky he brushed up on the local Lingshui dialect on the plane, and that Huadu's cover identity for him actually stood solid. Liu Gensheng declared that it was good he still remembered his roots, which meant he would live a blessed life. A few moments later, they rolled up at the Huadu mission base. Liu Gensheng turned to Yihei and reminded him that in 2 days, Lingshui County's biggest event, the Grand Triennial Gala, would take place. So he must attend, and if he got shy and refused to leave the house, Liu would come fetch him personally, and Yihei acknowledged it and thanked him. Chuzhou muttered that the house hadn't been lived in for more than a decade, that it had gone to ruin, and that weeds and mosquitoes made it clear they had a mess to clean. Yihei responded that cleaning happened to be his specialty. He stomped his feet and blasted his energy into the ground. Chuzhou remarked that this was no cleaning, this was a massacre, and Yihei countered that it was quick and efficient. Chuzhou pointed out that they should dump their luggage first while he set up micro cameras around the property for surveillance, and Liu Qingzhu added that she would check inside the house. She then called out to Yihei and urged him to come and take a look. He pressed her on what she had spotted. She revealed that there was a shrine inside, though she couldn't tell who or what it was meant for. And when Yihei pointed out it hadn't been there originally, she pressed him on what he meant. He explained that the shrine was made of wood, and if it had stood there the whole time, it would have rotted away years ago. But this one only gathered dust, and once wiped clean, it looked practically new. Chuzhou remarked that it meant somebody else had shoved it into that dusty old house, and he griped about how that statue looked off, so he insisted they ought to hack it down. Liu Qingzhu urged him to hold up, and not barrel ahead because it might turn out to be an important clue, so she pressed that they should check it over first. Yihei admitted he agreed, and when she pressed him on who exactly he was siding with and threw in that he was just a battle maniac, the jab made his grin twitch. They pushed that they should at least peel off whatever was under that clay mask before smashing it apart. She yanked the cloth from its face, and the eyes suddenly lit with a sinister glow. Yihei stiffened in alarm. He muttered that something was wrong. He knew it reeked of filth, and he barked at Chuzhou to carve it down. Chuzhou swung his sword in one fierce arc and sliced the shrine apart. The 3 of them jolted when thick black liquid seeped from the cracked shrine. Liu Qingzhu blurted if the statue was bleeding and demanded what that black liquid even was. Yihei proved sharp. He instantly summoned Zawarudo. Zawarudo lunged and grabbed at the black liquid. It warped into a dark entity bristling with monstrous mouths. Yihei ordered Chuzhou to seal it. Liu Qingzhu demanded what the hell that thing was. Yihe turned to her while pouring his energy into her. He pressed if she was all right, and while he judged that thing's psychic filth had tainted her, so he channeled clean martial energy into her. She insisted she was fine. She realized the crushing wave of terror had lifted, and a warm surge spread inside her body. Yihe remarked that it looked like Ling Shui's anomalies were tied to that warped clay statue, and he pointed out they had just taken their first big step in the investigation, so he told the two of them to stay and keep watch in case it twisted again, since he had business to handle. He remembered tagging the tricycle driver earlier with a radiation marker, and if the timing lined up, it was time to drag him in, so he added there was no need to fetch him because the driver would walk right to him instead. Meanwhile, Liu Gensheng showed up at the county's Jinshan Buddhist temple. A monk pushed the door open for him. He addressed him as benefactor and told him the abbot was waiting inside. Liu Gensheng agreed with a simple nod. The monk guided him down into an underground passage. The two of them halted before a pair of massive doors. The monk called to the abbot and announced that benefactor Liu Gensheng had reached the blessing standard, and he added that he had something to report. The monk turned toward abbot and declared with formal stiffness that they had brought the donor, Liu Gensheng, who had achieved the blessing standard, and he added with weight that he carried something worth reporting. Abbot fixed Liu Gensheng with a steady look and pressed him to explain his intent and the reason for his sudden arrival. Without warning, the monk blurted if there was someone else among them. In an instant, he shifted into a snarling beast, and Liu Gensheng recoiled in horror. Liu Gensheng stammered again and again that an immortal was present in their midst. Abruptly, Yihe descended from above with a sharp entrance. He landed on the beast's head and crushed it flat. He remarked with casual disdain that the creature was filthy, and mused how fortunate it was that Zawarudo kept the muck outside, because if it splattered on his clothes, it would never wash out. Liu Gensheng cried out that it was him, from the old Yi family. At once, the two statues stationed at the doors began to stir. Yihe glanced at them and quipped if the Buddha statue could actually move. The statues surged forward with attacks aimed at him. Zawarudo intercepted their strikes with brute defense. They shuddered while straining to break through his guard. More hands suddenly materialized around them. Every one of them lunged at Yihe in unison. Yihe cloaked the spatial ring in invisibility and muttered that the enemy must not lay eyes on it. He then called forth his weapon, Starfall Cleaver. He drew it with deliberate force. He slashed with speed and instantly severed the statue's limbs. The statue's hands and weapons clattered onto the floor. Yihe mocked if they also had eye lasers, and if such contraptions counted as Buddha statues. He scoffed that the beam was sluggish and remarked that he should see what treasures their bellies held. He carved through the statues and exposed intricate mechanical parts within. Liu Gensheng was struck speechless by terror. In that frozen moment, he realized his own body had been cleaved in two. He lay sprawled beside the ruined statues. Yihe noted with sharp curiosity that they were never living beings, and pointed out that his life field had never sensed vitality from those two bodhisattvas. Yet he pressed how a backwater county like Lingshui could harbor constructs so advanced. He wondered aloud if the answers waited behind those heavy doors. He reminded himself he was a university student and remarked that he ought to at least practice some basic door-knocking etiquette. Zawarudo smashed the door with a crushing punch. Yihe called out with mocking edge if anyone was home. The door shattered immediately. Yihe strode forward with confidence. He remarked that the chamber was quite the hidden trove. An entire underground palace sprawled before him with a colossal Buddha towering within. He noted their guests were already waiting and prodded Abbot if he intended to keep hiding like a little mouse. Another monk emerged with a heavy sigh. He declared that their temple bore him no grudge and demanded why he came here to profane it. Yihe remarked with a mocking drawl that the monk was basically a robot, and pressed if he was hooked on playing a suit actor already. He hacked his body clean in two with his sword in a savage motion. The monk declared with grim weight that his blood karma reeked of heaviness.